this is actually like a warning for all of you. I'm not wearing pants, so if I accidentally lift up a leg too high, here's a little cheat. There goes my knee.
Yeah, let's see. Ooh.
That could happen because I am doing my laundry and I have no pants right now.
That's okay.
And it won't be dry until this podcast is over.
Okay.
Just like me.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
Welcome to the Worst of All Possible Worlds, the first and only podcast that's sopping wet. I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes. Joining us today, we have a very exciting guest. You might know him for being the real-life husband of the real Betty Boop. It's Alec Robbins.
It's me.
It's you. What's up, man?
Thank you for making sure everyone knows for sure that I really am married to Betty Boop. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's canonical.
It's very important.
Yeah.
We're talking about Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip.
One of my favorite things in the world.
Yeah.
Yes! We're all be pilled. We're all be pilled, baby.
I think that you had posted, Alex, something on Twitter or something about
I post about
this.
it all the time.
Because you've got a website, right, where you keep like jokes that you find interesting in shows.
Yeah. So the most recent place I posted about it was like I had been keeping a tally of like jokes I liked that weren't well known, like I don't know, like everyone knows like, you know, the Bort joke from Simpsons or like, I mean, like, there's a million jokes that people always talk about. I'm like, what are the ones that I always laugh at that I never hear people talking about? So I started compiling them. And one of them wasn't really a joke. It was just like this scene from Studio 60 that a bunch of cast members behind the scenes on an SNL type show are practicing their spit takes. Right. And they're just drinking water and spitting water on each other and trying to get the timing right. And it's the most insane interpretation of what professional comedians or performers might be doing behind the stage on a comedy show.
That gag is so interesting because it's like, I can see it being good because it does this little smash cut from someone getting shot up with like antibiotics or whatever straight to like four guys just standing around just blasting water in each other's faces.
It's why everyone got sick in that episode.
Yeah, so it's like, oh, this is kind of funny. It's like a sort of a almost Family Guy type cutaway. It's showing that these guys are absolute imbeciles, but then it keeps going, right? Like the scene keeps going on to a point where we're now cut forward into the future where everyone is still dying of COVID-19 in the Studio 60.
B12 virus, thank you very much.
It was really impressive the way that they all got COVID, like 13 years, 12 years, 14 years ahead of the actual pandemic.
Well, it was actually SARS-1. They were the only U.S. cases of SARS.
My favorite thing about that scene is when Matthew Perry playing Matt Albee walks in and he's like the head writer. He's the creative head of the show within the show. And he like takes a look at all of his cast members and he rolls his eyes. He knows this is insane. And then he walks out of the room.
And it ends up being the saving grace of the episode. That's the sketch that they have to put on at the last minute.
He has to do spit take theater.
So
a brilliant thing that he writes during a commercial break.
Today what we're going to be doing is taking a look at the first two episodes of Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip.
Yeah, but we are diseased enough that all of us watched this whole show in its entirety this last week.
I'm so proud of you all.
Yeah.
Had any of you seen it before?
I had seen most of it before.
Okay.
I had seen everything but the last two episodes, I believe.
I had some of the most insane episodes.
Oh, they're great.
Absolutely. And what was weird is I stopped at a cliffhanger. I stopped it when it was revealed that Tom's brother had been kidnapped.
Yeah. Oh my God. I always pitch the show as like it's a show about what happens behind the scenes at SNL, and then the series finale is about like one of the cast members' brothers being a prisoner of war.
Yeah.
It's the West Wing. He just finales it with the West Wing finale.
Yeah. It slowly morphs into the West Wing as it goes on.
Absolutely. Because that's all he knows how to do. And we'll talk about that too. I had watched this show when it came out.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I had watched maybe the first, like, this is, again, now we're getting a better picture of teenage Josh, right? This guy is watching House. This guy is watching 24. And this guy is watching Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip.
Yeah.
Did you really like it then?
I don't know that I really liked it, but I think that for me, the thing was, I was 16 at the time, right? And so I was like, oh, this is all very adult. I'm watching something that is very like, not adult in a porn way, but yeah, it had buzz. Exactly.
It was Sorkin's like post West Wing show, and it was like
he's coming back to network TV.
Yeah,
like it was really built up.
Too is like it aired like a month before 30 Rock, literally
on the same network.
On the same network, and everyone at the time was like, "Sorry, Tina Fey, you both have a very similar premise, but you're not going to be able to beat Aaron Sorkin."
You're about to get owned by Aaron Sorkin. You've been doing comedy your whole life, but you're about to get a smackdown by the guy who made The West Wing.
Like, this show was such a big fucking deal because, again, this guy pretty much only produces hits, right? Like, you can count the number of flops on part of your hand. Like, The West Wing dipped, and then he left, and then it kept running for more and more seasons. The movies hit. The plays are like whatever, but they're plays. No one gives a shit. And we'll get there.
Especially not me.
And so this show, they made the pilot, and it was subject to a brutal bidding war between the networks. Right. NBC bought it for like unprecedented amounts of money.
Who were they bidding against? Do you know?
CBS. It was CBS. It was bidding against CBS.
That's right.
And NBC was at the top of its game right at this point because they're getting The Office out there. They're of course getting 30 Rock, Community, like all of these very, very big properties that have had this incredible longevity. Yeah. This cultural attachment that people have to these things.
They're also the network of SNL.
Yeah, which is one of the most psychotic parts of the show.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. You don't get to find out if SNL still exists in the show until like a few episodes in, I think. Where someone just casually references that, SNL still exists and it airs on Saturdays right after our show.
In New York, because they're the LA show.
Yeah, that's the other. They buried the lead of the premise. The premise is like, what if it's behind the scenes at a SNL type show? No, what if SNL was on the West Coast is like a way more interesting premise.
Yeah, well, and it's not just what if SNL's on the West Coast, right? It's
and it airs on Friday.
It's the other show. So you've got presumably Mad TV, because Fox also exists in this universe. Just to be very clear, there are 5 major networks in this show. NBS is the 5th. So you've got Studio 60 on Friday night, and then presumably you've got Mad TV and SNL going head to head on Saturday.
And why would you call
so many cans of worms? Yeah.
Why would you call it NBS? Like the whole point is that they're like setting it up to be parallel to NBC, parallel to SNL. And it's like, no, these also are there.
I can answer that question. It's because that channel has no BS. I wish I were kidding. So
wait, really? Oh no.
So here's the other thing too, is that not only does SNL exist in this universe, so does The West Wing. Yes. So does Aaron Sorkin and Bradley Whitford and all these people who are just like wandering around. Like Allison Janney is acting with the guy who plays Danny in The West Wing.
Oh, right, that's what it is. Yes.
It's really weird.
It's when she
look like the guy that I was doing the show with. Like the show actually caves in on itself like a dying star about 5 episodes before it finale.
So we'll get to, more of the plot and stuff in a little bit, but now we sort of talked about
enticing.
We talked now a bit about the overview of like what this thing is, how it got made. And Alec, I actually am curious to hear from you, like what your initial exposure was to this thing and how it is that you've continued to like find it so fascinating over the years.
I truly have no clue. I definitely first watched it in college. I was very late. I did not watch it when it aired. I remember it being around. I was like not interested in watching The West Wing or anything, and I didn't care about Aaron Sorkin.
Right.
Probably watched it before The Newsroom. I'm pretty sure that's the timeline. And The Newsroom came out and I was like, oh, he's doing this again.
Yeah.
He reuses like entire plots and like subjects and jokes and dialogue exchanges.
Start with a network riff. With just an homage to network in a way. I guess the Newsroom one went extremely viral. That was like, I guess it was a good thing he tried it again
actually
because it
responded
worked.
to. Like people, it gets shared on Facebook probably still today.
Yeah.
And this one was like, we're doing the network monologue, and just like with NBC and SNL, we're going to keep referencing network for the rest of this episode. It's like, no, we get it. We know what you just did.
We know what you're doing. We know what you're doing.
Like, my context is I've always been like in the comedy world. Like at the time I watched it, I would have been doing stand-up in Michigan and pretty deeply exposed to like how depressing and sad and
the brutal reality of the Kalamazoo stand-up comedy scene.
Yeah, just being like at like an open mic in Grand Rapids at like at a hotel bar.
Oh God! You're like in the lobby of the fucking Amway Grand Hotel. Like,
this place, Sunday Night Funnies, that I used to go to almost every Sunday. Yeah,
the same crucible that forged Tim Allen.
Yeah, except he was at Mark Ridley's. I think that was like his home club, which is in Royal Oak. And I only went there a few times. I used to perform at the open mic there, and it was like too classy for us. It was like too serious.
Alec, were you in the back practicing spit takes before your set? Was that a thing you were doing?
That's what I'm getting at, is like, I remember watching that scene in particular. It always stuck with me because I'm like, you're insane. You work with comedians. He's clearly like met comedians. He works in Hollywood. This is not like a foreign world to him, but it still is being interpreted by someone who like wants to wring all possible drama out of something that is like not that glorious, and if he wants to treat it with the same gravity and reverence as The West Wing, as like politics. And, when in reality, comedy is like 8 depressing people in the back room of a bar, all just counting down the seconds till they get to go up on stage for an audience of other depressed comics. Mm-hmm. And I mean, like, I've also done improv. I know like what that world's like, and it's kind of like the theater kid version of that, where everyone's in denial and really peppy and chipper, and like they just don't want to admit that they're depressed. So it's like, no matter where you look at it, comedy is the most painful place to be existing at a low level.
It's like this podcast too. It's similar vibe.
I didn't say that.
This is an episode that I have been reluctant to do since the beginning of this podcast, because as a Dirtbag Left podcast, I feel like Aaron's going to come up at some point, because he is sort of a pretty easy punching bag for the left. And when I was 17 years old, I originated a role in the Farnsworth Invention, which was a show at the La Jolla Playhouse written by Aaron Sorkin and directed by Des Makinov. Aaron and I got along like gangbusters. He was always incredibly kind to me in a way that he absolutely did not have to be to a child actor, even though at 17, I kind of balanced that fine line between being a kid and being an adult in a way that no one in the cast had any idea what to do with me.
Yeah, you've always been kind of an old Italian man.
Yes, I have been. An old curmudgeon Italian man. There was one guy, I was in the bathroom doing my hair for the show, and one of the other cast members was shaving next to me, and he turned and looked at me. He's like, you want to use hot water when you shave, because it gets all the hair up, and then cold water afterwards.
That actor, Matthew Perry.
And so
this is fascinating. I had no idea. Wow.
Yeah. And so I was, and the Farnsworth Invention premiered in 2007, in March of 2007.
Oh my God.
Oh boy.
So I was there when Aaron found out that this was canceled.
Right.
It was closing night of Farnsworth, and it was, it was the night that he found out, and he was obviously super bummed about it, but the writing had been on the wall for a while. He wasn't in rehearsals for a lot of it because he was, quote, trying to save his TV show. So he was in LA doing a lot of meetings and trying to figure out budget stuff, because, the downfall of Studio 60, regardless of quality or what people think about it, was actually just money. This thing cost.
It's an expensive looking show. Yeah. It is impressive.
Yeah, it took $3 million an episode for this thing, and they just kept trying to find different ways to cut costs, because it has a pretty stacked cast, I think, all things considered. It
does. No, it's...
Yeah, and so I've always been very hesitant to sort of approach any of these topics about Aaron, because he is somebody that I knew personally who was always very kind to me, but it's also, I watched this show and it drained the life out of me, slowly but surely. And again, I think a lot of this stuff does work about it, but I absolutely don't think it's above reproach. And I'm really excited to finally dig into this show, because it has haunted me like a specter ever since.
I think the point that you make, AJ, about like and Alec, the point that both of you make about his facility with an understanding of actors is really, really crucial.
I know, he cast me, so
nice. There's a part a little bit later on in the show where they have to deliver a piece of bad news to the actors, and all the actors get in a room and they're immediately wondering what they did wrong. And to me, that was like, oh, you really do understand actors.
Yeah,
like,
he's good at that.
You get it.
Yeah.
So it's just this interesting balance between those two components. And I feel like when he is tapping into what makes the characters tick, it's usually at least baseline somewhat interesting. It's the other stuff that is often in tension with that. And I feel like the pilot itself is a fantastic example of those two dynamics.
He really does understand a lot of things. Like, it's a very lived in show.
Yes.
And yet everything surrounding comedy and what SNL is like, he is completely ignorant.
It's out of his frame of reference.
He's out of his depths. He's making huge assumptions. And you can tell, like, this is someone who has reverence for theater. This is someone who has reverence for the stage and for, like, the production of television. He really does care and get it. And he puts a lot of, like, time into showing those details. And they're pretty accurate. Like, you know, like the Cal, the director, who's like, you know, just you see him behind the scenes all the time, like, directing shots. And that's very cool to see, but then you hear him like talk about how to write a sketch in the writer's room of a comedy show.
And one really great example of that exact thing of being like, well, we've got to do a dramatic, like I've been in high stakes producer meetings where things are debating getting cut. So I know what this thing would be like is what kicks off this episode, the pilot, right? We've got fucking Judd Hirsch out here and he's fighting with this other guy who represents the network.
Michael Stuhlbarg.
Yeah.
I always forget he's in it. He's only in the first episode.
And Judd Hirsch is like, you know, we got to put this sketch on. It's so important, but it's really controversial. Oh, no.
And
Josh, what's the name of the sketch?
So wait, I need to like set it up even more. They draw it out for so long. They build up this controversial sketch that they refuse to put on the air.
Yes.
And you're like, what's it going to be? What could this sketch be in 2006 that's going to blow?
What's the name of the sketch, Alec?
The sketch is called Crazy Christians.
What? What? Come on.
And
like, we
it up
can't
so
see
much,
it. We
they
have to
never
just
show
go
it.
off of names.
They will never show. They show other sketches. They never give you a glimpse of Crazy Christians.
Crazy Christians, you can't do that
air
on
that.
TV.
You can't air that on broadcast television.
Crazy? In America?
And it's like, it's the first clue into how fucked this show is, because like a huge central pillar of the show is this relationship between Matt Albee and one of the cast members, Harriet Hayes. And the driving wedge between them has very little to do with like who they are as people and more about she's extremely religious and he is an atheist. Yes. And like they're butting heads over that. They have like real issues as a couple, but like the show really only cares about this religious
which is also weird because that's not really how relationships work. Like,
well, it might be how one particular relationship
you're not wrong. We'll get to that later.
That's the other thing hanging over all of this, which is a deeply fucked element.
But yeah, in terms of this controversy over the sketch Crazy Christians, right? Judd Hirsch gets the note from the network that they've got to cut the sketch, right? And so he goes on during the cold open, which is this, you know, standard issue like SNL direct address, you know, somebody's being George W. Bush.
Nick Cordray is doing Bush.
And we're having some fun here because we get D.L. Hughley. He's doing like the introduction thing. He's talking to the audience about the technical stuff. This stuff is great. I love all of this shit.
Like
I love whenever they're
like a warm-up comic. It's great.
Yeah, I love this stuff whenever they have a problem with like someone used the wrong script format or they don't have the right type of tape player.
It's exhilarating.
Right? 'Cause they're using, you know, it's like that stuff is awesome to watch. It's so much fun. And then it's back to this shit. And so, Rob Corddry's brother is doing his Bush impression. And then the network moment happens.
So I think what Aaron is really good at is edging his audience. I think none more so than in this opening. Like he really, the reason why it's so drawn out, this argument about Crazy Christians, and like it's so perfectly paced so that by the time he's delivering this tirade, you know, it feels like enough momentum has been built that you're so excited to see him just rail against what he thinks is like bad television. It's basically the remote control in your hand is a crack pipe, he screams down the barrel of a camera. And the director, Cal, will not cut away from him.
And we get these quick cuts between what's going on stage, like a close-up of Judd Hirsch, again, very network-esque, shots of the control room and what's happening on, you know, the different monitors. And then, of course, the close-ups of Cal, who's being berated by the network head to, like, cut the feed.
And, of course, this is one of those things that network did so much better because network, like, grounded it in the reality of what it's like to be in a control room like that, which is no one gets excited, right? Because you can't. You have to be like a fucking, like, air traffic controller. Everything is so focused. Like I bet there was one point in the Oscars when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock where someone went, "Oh wow." Anyway, camera 2. Like that's about as animated as those fucking guys get.
How about that?
Like,
all right, we're gonna need to cut the mic.
Camera 3. Yeah. Okay.
But that's it. Yeah. Those guys, stage managers in theater, are the same way. Like, you have to be the cool head under pressure, and so does The Room. He wanted to create this dramatic thing that doesn't really share much of a resemblance with what the real world would look like.
Which is a problem throughout the whole show.
Yeah, he likes to write these sort of fantasy worlds. He cited that as kind of a problem when he left the West Wing. He was like, well, our White House has moved so far away from George Bush's White House, but I think that's what ended up getting people to come back to it, because then they could pretend that there was this functioning America while George Bush was just doing whatever the fuck he wanted to do. And then the newsroom is the perfect example of that fantasy, because it's like, here's what the news did 3 years ago, and here's what I would do differently.
Yeah, with 2020 hindsight, here's how I would fix everything. But it allows you to buy into that fantasy, right? Then the whole thing about the West Wing is that there were a lot of people who were like, oh no, this isn't a fantasy. This is how government works. And it's that, I think that's sort of the big problem, is that people go into West Wing thinking, oh, this is how I think government should work.
Yeah, and that's like, so like out of the 3 shows we just mentioned, like the reason I like Studio 60 and can watch it while I can't watch the other 2 is like the West Wing feels really like, it just reminds me too much of deluded people. Of like people who
interesting.
Wish this is how it worked. This is like what I really think it's like, and not understanding that it's not at the time, and like going back to it as like this nostalgia. And then the newsroom is this like poisonous, like pretentious, oh, didn't you think of this sort of scenario where I'm like, I can't sit through somebody lecturing anyone like that. But Studio 60 exists in this weird space where it has all of those elements, but it's serving the most pointless shit ever, which is a comedy show.
Yes.
And it mixes in the high stakes of the other 2 shows, which feels so out of place here.
It's wild how out of place it is. But Judd Hirsch, it must be said, knocks it out of the park in the 2 scenes he's in.
He kills it,
in the entire series. The fact he doesn't come back is wild to me.
Because they mention him a lot.
All the time.
And like, so he's presiding over SNL in its bad years, because SNL has just turned bad. It used to be good, but now it's bad. That's the truth. That's
not
the thing.
SNL, Brian. Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip. This is a different show. This is not Saturday Night Live.
And so it's really interesting, especially since Mark McKinney actually shows up a little bit later. This is just episode 1 of Slings and Arrows up until the network moment. It's Oliver, when he was played by Stephen Ouimet, the voice of Beetlejuice, going around directing some horrible production of Midsummer Night's Dream, except Slings and Arrows also has the decency to do something better with it, which is just he ends up getting drunk, falling down in the middle of the street and getting run over by a pig truck and dying.
This one, he just gets fired, and then we never see him again.
And then we meet the protagonists of the show.
We do. So let's go into that next, shall we?
It's the next magic here. I love these 2.
This show has like 8 protagonists, so we're going to have to introduce all of them somewhat briefly.
Octo manufacturing.
They all get their own title cards, though.
So we've got Jordan, right? Jordan's the first one. This is Amanda Peet. She is the new head of programming at the network. And she's being welcomed to the media group by Ed Asner, who is like the president of the whole like fucking thing.
I want Macau.
She's at this dinner and she gets a call in the middle of it. And it's like, oh no, what's happened? Something crazy's going on down at Studio 60. What's her deal? What drives her? Do we find her compelling as a character in any way, shape, or form? She is a woman. Alec, I'll start with you.
It's literally like, what if a woman was in charge? And what if everybody underestimated her? And what if also she was actually really good at her job?
Ooh.
And it's like, it's this thing that the show is so proud of itself for doing. And it never lets you forget. And like characters are constantly going like, oh yeah, how are you going to handle this? You're probably going to do this. She's like, no, actually, I'm going to do this thing nobody ever could have thought of. And it's going to sound crazy, but just trust me, it'll work. And then it does. And everyone's like, is she the real deal? And then Jack will be like, fuck, I hate her. I hate her so much for being right.
Amanda Peet is kind of Jordan is kind of a flibbertigibbet a little bit, like she's a little bit absent-minded and like she'll go off on like little weird tangents, but she always has the right answer in the end.
She makes a lot of mistakes too. Like, and they make sure like she'll get people's names wrong because she's new to the studio or new to the network, and like she'll also like make. Oh, also she's funny. That's like a thing the show wants you to know. She's actually got a sense of humor. and she'll impress the writers of Studio 60 multiple times with her timing.
Yeah, Bradley Whitford has a line where he says, "You look like one of them, but you talk like one of us."
Yeah. Oh my God, that line.
Amazing.
She is an advocate for the creatives, for someone like Edward Albee, the author of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, who's going to come in as the showrunner for Saturday Night Live.
Yes. When Ed Asner's on screen, all he's ever talking about is Macau or listing people's resumes. Like this opening dinner, he just sits down and he's like, "Jordan, you're the top of your class and so and so." And I love the dinner parties where I sit down and tell people where they came from. It's a very good.
He loves the as you know exposition. He'll even have someone be like, "Have you heard of this?" And they'll say yes. And he's like, "Anyway, here's what this is."
The most egregious,
like, they said yes.
The most egregious exposition in the first episode is like, I think Jordan's talking about the big three, which are the main three cast members of Studio 60. And another exec goes, "Wait, the big three, why are we talking about Detroit?" And then Steven Weber as Jack goes like, no, she's talking about the cast members, the big three, and then explains what that means.
Just another man from the heartland who just doesn't know what's going on in television.
But yeah, I mean, Jordan matters because she's been brought in to turn around the network, right? Like the programming, as we learned from Judd Hirsch's network moment, it has been trending toward the tawdry and the mundane. And so they're really hoping to give it a real shot in the arm. In fact, we learn not only is she, competent or whatever, we even learn at one point that she is so good at what she did that when she left her previous network or when she came to the network or some shit, TMG stock dropped 3/8 of a point is a thing that she says. Now, 3/8 of a point is 37 cents. For reference, at the time, GE, which owns NBC, was trading around $167 a share. That is not a meaningful differentiation, but it's in the script, and I wanted to point that out.
No, it's very important, actually, because there's going to be a lot of jargon thrown into this dialogue that makes its characters sound incredibly smart, and it's a lot of dialogue that does not hold up to scrutiny once you start examining it.
Exactly.
But it's an incredible skill that Aaron has where you can have this dialogue that sounds very smart, and then it makes you feel smart while listening to it.
Yes,
like
because it's not hard to grasp what he's saying either. You follow.
No. Yeah. It's sort of like listening to something that's half English, half a different language. You feel like you're learning the other language because you have that baseline of English in there, and you feel smarter coming out the other side of it. I always feel after I watch an Aaron Sorkin thing, I've never felt more productive in my life. I sit down on my computer and I'm tapping out bangers because my brain just like electrifies it. Also, 3-6 Mafia is here.
Yes. Yes.
And is it Felicity Huffman as the host?
It's Felicity Huffman as the host.
Okay. And this is another decision that the show makes, is that every episode they actually have like in the world of the show, like in the show itself, they have a guest star and a musical guest like SNL.
Yeah.
And sometimes the show of that evening takes place across multiple episodes, so you'll see that guest star. Like Allison Janney's there for like 2 or 3 episodes.
Studio 60 is enormous, and I think that's the big difference between it and SNL. Studio 60 is a giant ass building.
They have the whole theater. Yeah. They have the whole building. Yeah.
And you can walk and talk while the broadcast is happening. While they are live, you can have a walk and talk in the upper hallway. You'll be fine. No one's going to hear you.
Yep. And one such walk and talk happens with the introduction of Jack Rudolph. Now, Jack Rudolph is the chair of NBS. He's the chair of the network. He is the guy.
He shot Lee Harvey Oswald in broad daylight.
Jack is, we've got this great walk and talk. He's moving along. There's a PA, who naturally a woman, who tries to stop him. He tells her to shut up.
It would not be a Sorkin show if a woman was not fucking told to shut up and shown just exactly how she's being wrong and annoying.
Just a little capper for Jordan. Yes. This is a spoiler if you haven't seen the whole show, but for a character that starts off with such like a loud statement about being a woman in this industry, her character is relegated to giving birth for 3 episodes off screen for the last few, like for the end of the show.
Totally off screen.
My guess is that they could not afford to pay her for 3 episodes.
That's possible.
I think she had moved on and done. I think it's called Martian Boy. This like little indie picture that got put out that same year. I think that she was like, okay, I've got another project that I'm working on now.
The writing was on the wall for the show after Christmas. Like they were like, we're doing the full season, but I don't think we're getting past that.
So Jack then, after this walk and talk, after he tells the woman to shut up, they go into the 3-6 Mafia dressing room, which is full of weed smoke, to watch the tape of what Judd Hirsch did.
They can't stop smoking reefers.
In a good version of this show, they would all get really, really, like, they would leave the room and all be high as hell, like that one episode of Party Down.
Yes.
But that does not happen here, unfortunately.
Later on, Jack does get drunk a lot. Like, the last 4 episodes that Jack Rudolph is in, he's absolutely wasted.
Yes.
But they just,
Speaking of
it was
Party
too early.
Down, by the way, he has a great role in Party Down.
Yes, he does.
Yes, he sure does.
I love
Ricky
Steven Weber.
Sargalesh. But yes, Jack is portrayed by Steven Weber.
I love this character. I think he's like, they use him as the villain constantly because, of course, he's the evil studio guy. Like, he's the one you need to have there in opposition. And then Sorkin gets such mileage out of like having the good guys slowly change his mind, or having him like stop and sit, and he's like, "You fucking did it, okay, fine." Like, it's just that energy is like really satisfying to watch, and he does a good job with this grumpy guy. Who's like,
Well, it's also like, this is a show fundamentally divided against itself, because there's everything that's happening in Studio 60, but then there's also all the plot lines that are just happening at the network that have nothing to do with Studio 60, and it's the most boring shit you've ever seen in your goddamn life. There's a point where they're just talking about a pilot that we'll never see. They develop an entire plot about the UN, I think.
Oh, yeah, right.
oh my god, I forgot about that show.
It's so good. It's like, we could produce some reality show about farts or whatever.
No, and actually, I want to just, as long as we're on this tangent, I want to be very clear that it's the choice is between this reality show that actually sounds like something that I would watch. It is a reality show where like they get a private investigator to go through their entire history, and so like all their dirty laundry gets aired on TV and they have to like confront it. I would watch the shit out of that.
Who would agree to that is my question.
I don't know. People would agree to that. Room Raiders.
That's not even a question. People would absolutely agree to that.
It feels like Charlie Brooker always did a good joke about this with someone finally getting their first TV show on the air, and it's just called Sick on a Widow, and it runs for 8 seasons where people just walk up to widows and throw up on them. And so the big thing is here, will NBC produce Sick on a Widow, or will it produce something that actually elevates the conversation, that makes people smarter and better?
Which is a
like,
fucking
say,
hour-long drama written by an off-Broadway, like a rising off-Broadway playwright about the fucking United Nations.
What do you think this is?
Every single time they mention this in universe, somebody's like, wow, a drama about the United Nations? That sounds really boring. And I'm like, yeah, it really does, doesn't it? Like, I don't even think fucking HBO could pull that off. And you definitely couldn't pull it off on basic network television.
Yes.
They say off-Broadway playwright like that means anything. It's like, it's probably Neil LaBute.
I am an off-Broadway playwright. I just want to be very clear that I am an off-Broadway playwright.
Let's
and
get
I'm
your
on a
UN
podcast.
show on NBS.
Absolutely.
This whole UN thing is so funny to me because I think it comes from, 2 of the main characters in this cast are not actually working on Studio 60. They are working for the network.
Right.
And so you have to start contriving reasons for these 2 to like be giving their time and attention to one of like 50 shows they have to be paying attention to.
Right. And it also gives them an opportunity to create conflict as well, right? Because like this fucking situation with, do we do the reality show or do we do the UN show? That creates an immediate wedge between Jordan and Jack. It's not an interesting wedge, but it's at least something to write around, because you have to fill 22 hour-long episodes with content.
Right. But I think it dilutes like what's actually happening, because it doesn't tie back to Studio 60 at all. Like,
absolutely.
The brilliance of 30 Rock, besides being, 20 minutes shorter, is that it's able to always tie like what Jack's doing into what Liz Lemon is doing, because they always consult each other on what they're doing, so it's all one cohesive universe. This feels like 2 completely different shows that are like duct taped together with a hope and a prayer.
Well, and that's sort of the interesting thing, and we get it. That metastasizes by the end, where the whole show is just about a hostage situation and a person who had a difficult labor completely off screen. It's like the West Wing and the newsroom are kind of inherently about stuff that's happening off screen. It's about stuff that's happening over there, and what are you going to do about it through the realm of politics or through the realm of media. But this is a show about people making a show. That's what the show is supposed to be. Right. It's people putting stuff together. And if you don't want it to be a workplace thing, then you just start making it about the people. right?
Yeah.
Like, but he can't do that. So then it has to be about a fucking like ISIS or not ISIS yet, a Taliban hostage situation.
Yeah. The thing about the conflict or whatever dramatically, or like making it about people versus making it about work. One way that he tries to thread that needle in this first episode is by being like, okay, so Jordan, you know, she's got her own ideas about how to do the thing. And one of the things she wants to do at Studio 60 is she wants to bring back 2 guys who Jack fired.
Yeah.
You know, will they come back? Will they come back to write the show? Because again, Judd Hirsch is out the door at this point. So they need a new head writer. And so Jordan's like, well, let's get these guys back. And so now it cuts to the WGA Awards.
2006 WGA Awards.
That's right. And we are here.
It was a hot year. It was a hot year.
And we are here with Matt and Danny. This is Matt Albee and Danny. What's his name?
Tripp.
His name is Danny Tripp. Yeah.
Now, I think, AJ, you had something here about naming conventions.
Yes.
With regard to Aaron Sorkin. So let's hear it.
So the story that Aaron will always tell in pretty much every interview about why he got interested in writing was that when he was a kid, his parents would take him to see Broadway shows. And the one he always cites is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. He saw it when he was like 7 or 8 years old. He had no idea what was happening, but he loved the sound of the language, like the percussiveness of the language is what inspired him to become a writer. So Matt Albee, his stand-in in the universe, he gives a tribute to the man that inspired him and then pronounces his name wrong. They call him Matt Albee for the entirety of the show, and it's Matt Albee. His name is Edward Albee, which I think is very, very funny. But also,
and very famously, Edward Albee would correct anyone who called him Edward Albee.
Oh, yeah, like that Diane Rehm interview on NPR.
Oh, it's so funny.
Deeply uncomfortable. But there is... But Aaron also pulls off an interesting trick here, because usually if he has a surrogate in the show, it's every character. Let's be real about this. Every character is Aaron.
There's so many Aaron Sorkins in Studio 60 alone.
Yes, and in West Wing particularly, I think he did a really good job of just being like, okay, so there are no characters, there is just me talking to myself. But in this one, he did try and go for a couple of different like other characters, because Jordan is not like sort of his usual protagonist. She's a little bit like his girl Friday more. She's got like kind of a pluck and viv about her. But Danny Tripp and Matt Albee are the same person split in two. It is just a convention so that Aaron can talk to himself. And I guess you could make the argument that like Danny Tripp is supposed to be like his Tommy Schlamme, which is the real name of the director of both The West Wing and this show, Thomas Schlamme. His name is Tommy Schlamme. And so that Danny Tripp is supposed to be based on that, but he gives all of his like cocaine addiction to Danny Tripp, and then keeps it from Matt Albee until midway through the series, where he's like, fuck it.
Matt Albee is also a drug addict.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
Like when I think of the show, it's like I remember Matt being the drug addict, then I started over. I'm like, oh yeah, no, it was.
But that gets dropped and traded.
Yeah, because they start and he's on like Percocet or something because he had a back surgery, or allegedly had a back surgery.
He's high during the first episode. He keeps saying, legally, I'm allowed to be.
But then they keep referencing that Tripp got caught with cocaine, which is something that actually happened to Aaron Sorkin in 2001. He got caught at the Burbank airport with crack and marijuana and mushrooms in his luggage. Mm-hmm. And thank God for him that it was before 9/11, because that would have just been like a disaster for him later on. Yeah. But, you know, and he's talked about that. He wrote An American President while he was just freebasing every single night that he was working on that movie. Yeah. A lot of the West Wing too. You can tell that cocaine is a part of his process, and that actually sort of gets. It's weird how like poorly the treatment of the drug stuff is, like how kind of just like hacky and not interesting it is when he is actually trying to pick apart something that is autobiographical, right? And about his own issues with having to meet these commitments of writing the way that he writes, and also dealing with this drug problem that helps him do it.
There is the scene where like Matt finds out, and like his reaction is to be very sympathetic, which I'm like, oh, that's an impressive choice. Like, because I mean, I think it's very easy to have people react poorly and have that be interesting drama. But like, no, it's a way to illustrate that these two care about each other,
and they have such good chemistry. These two,
excellent, yes, they do. It is really fun to watch.
They're really not on screen together enough, honestly. But yeah, so Bradley Whitford's character has had an issue with cocaine. So there's like an issue with like studio insurance. He's not going to be able to make his next movie, which he's making a movie about Nikola Tesla, the inventor.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yep.
Much like someone who might be writing a Broadway-bound play about Farnsworth and his invention
of the television.
Well, what have we here?
Well. Really, the only times we would see Aaron would be when like big name producers would come to see the show. So that's how, the night Spielberg was there, he came and did a little whining dining. And also the night that Christian Chenoweth came.
Yeah.
Which...
Let's talk about that.
They seemed fine. I got to meet her. She was very nice. She's very small. I grabbed onto her hand and I felt like she would shatter into a million pieces.
So Matt and Danny are an odd couple, right? We've sort of talked about this, but like Matt plays by his own rules, right? And Danny sort of moderates his renegade tendencies, but
he gets results. God damn
it. But the thing that Matt is most upset about, and this connects to what you just mentioned, AJ, with Kristen Chenoweth, Matt is very sad because his girlfriend dumped him. He's so sad.
Yes, he's very sad. He's the saddest boy.
He's the saddest boy. Right after this, there's a title card that says The Big Three, and we meet the first of the Big Three. This is Harriet Hayes, played by Sarah Paulson. Her main character traits are that she's a Christian and...
blonde.
She's supposed to be the funniest cast member. Like, I think like it's
By
known
far,
that she's like the best part of the show. Like, she's the thing that's keeping it going.
Yeah,
like,
she's supposed to be like
we see
Kate
no evidence of
McKinnon.
her being funny in the show.
Yeah.
Which is not a knock on
once.
Sarah Paulson. It's just like the show can't pull that off. It can't
No.
convince you that
She's
anyone's
like
funny.
Lucille Ball. She can't make a joke, but she can deliver her lines the funnier than anyone else. Right.
Yes, that is supposed to be what she's able to do.
Well, it's a lot like watching like a superhero movie and everyone keeps telling you this is a superhero. And then you never see a scene
where they do anything heroic. Yeah. It's wild because it also, it's one of those things that like, I feel like the big three, we're starting to get into like D.L. Hughley's character.
GM, Chrysler, and Ford.
Yes, the big three. Not those. But also Nate Cordry is Tom. And the thing that struck me most is, I don't know, I mean, Alec, I think you could probably speak to this more, but I've hung out with comedians in my time. Usually there's more bits being tried out. You know, there's a little bit
Usually
more.
they're spitting more. They're doing a lot of spit takes.
Drowning in spit takes.
This is where I could, the show gets comedy so wrong and the type of people who are comedians. It really just thinks they're all theater people.
Yes,
100%.
And
it doesn't get that like comedians are very like vicious, mean, and like not always. That's not true across the board. But like if you're hanging out with comedians, there's a lot more like bitterness going around in my experience, and a lot less camaraderie. And if there is camaraderie, it's all because you're all like ripping on something together, or you're all sort of engaging in a bit together that you're having like, and it's always like a pretty good bit because they're frustrated they can't be funny elsewhere. Generally, like if a bunch of comedians are just like fucking around, it's usually pretty funny, like genuinely, because they're letting off steam and like they know how to. And you don't see any of that in this. And if they're being funny in this, it's like it's not funny. It's just like what Sorkin thinks funny is.
In this scene that we have introducing the three of them, again, this is Harriet Hayes, Tom Jeter, Nate Cordry, and Simon Stiles, who's D.L. Hughley. One of the actual original Kings of Comedy. They're all just like talking about the show in this scene. And they're talking about like, oh, the producer, he made that call and it was just so important. And it's like, I can't buy that they would care about the big picture in this way. Not that they wouldn't care about the big picture. I don't buy that they would be treating it as so important, right?
Yes.
Like comedians care about their work and they are passionate about their work, but only the most delusional of them believe that their work has like real life political consequences, right?
It's not
and
that
I was wondering if you
way,
could speak to that a little bit more, Alec.
I was going to say the other thing too, like other comedians I've hung out with aren't funny in conversation. They're just quiet, or they're like, they're not interested in trying to be funny around other people. They just like, I can do that on stage. I can do that when it's asked of me, but I just want to be a person. I don't know. Most comedians like definitely have an ego that I've met. I certainly do, but it's like, I kind of know that what I'm doing is not that important when I'm doing it. And if it like resonates, that's great. That's like a bonus. I think enough comedians have had to like eat shit for so long that they're under no illusions that like what they're doing is glorified. There's if you get plucked up into fame in any way, you stop being a comedian, you start being a celebrity. Like Like, it's not the same thing anymore. So, like, comedy never gets to be glorious. It's just...
But it's interesting that perspective that people have on SNL specifically, the real SNL. I'm not just referring to the show within this show as SNL. I mean, the real thing, because people do jack off about it all the time. People who are just like, no, it's so important that they get Alec Baldwin out there to do Donald Trump.
Oh, right,
Otherwise, Trump is going to win.
Did you ever read
Alec bought into that? Yeah,
I did.
Yeah.
Did you ever
Not
read
you,
the
Alec.
oral history of SNL, the book that they keep updating it? Like, every few years they add like a bunch of new shit from the new cast members. Yeah, it's like, I don't think I'd really recommend it, but like, it is a fascinating read because it's an oral history and it's interviews with everybody from across like every era of SNL. One thing that is kind of true about that book is they all do speak about it with reverence, but it's because SNL is what that is. It's like such an institution. It has a real history, and like whether it's good or bad or you like it or don't, it's been on the air for so long, and so many like culturally important celebrities have come out of it. So like everyone from Chevy Chase to Will Ferrell, like, and everyone in between, and like it's hard not to understand that it has an impact. So like when they talk about it, they do treat it like, hey, this is important. So like maybe that part of it is a little accurate.
No, one of the criticisms levied against this show was that you could never put a show dark enough on broadcast television to actually capture the writer's room of SNL. Yeah, it sounds like a fucking nightmare place.
The meanest this show ever gets in terms of like what the characters do to each other is that one of the junior cast members walks up to Harriet Hayes at a party and is like, oh, so you're one of those, huh? Like, it's like that's it. It's like being lightly ribbed for being a Christian.
They're like all in it together. They're a family.
Yeah.
Like no,
they pray before the show together. They all hold hands and pray. Yeah.
But like, what's weird about like everything I know about SNL or comedy in general is there are heavy cliques that all like hate each other and talk shit about each other. That's true of probably any group like that. But there's none of that in Studio 60. I mean, the writer's room has like the two writers that they think are hacks.
And they are dealt with.
They have big chips on their shoulders. But like within the writers themselves, there's not a lot of, I don't know.
We don't get a sense for like who the writers are as characters. Even once they purge most of the room and we're left with literally two people sitting at a table together, we never get to know those characters at all. There's a British lady who says maybe Dawn
from
words
The
an
Office.
episode.
Davis, yeah.
And they give her like 3 words and then she's gone again for the next hour.
Her bit is that when she cries, no one can understand her except for Andy McAnoff, I think. That's the whole bit, because they bring it back in the finale, and it's like, oh yeah, you remember that character, she mumbled.
But like the most we get any sense of the writer's room is maybe that first episode where we see John Ennis wearing really improbable clothing for him.
His presence is, I think, like Josh and I talked about this a little bit on Twitter.
We had talked about that, Alec, like how fucking bizarre it was to drop into the writer's room and see fucking one of the members of arguably the greatest sketch comedy troupe ever assembled in the world's unfunniest room.
I would love to pick his brain about this show, because I mean, you said the same thing, Josh. You're like, I wonder what was going through his mind as he's witnessing this funhouse mirror version of what it's like to write comedy coming from Mr. Show.
and then Albie just tells them all that they should show up like dressed better next time. Like they should all be wearing suits or something.
When I was doing stand-up, like there was like a thing around that era where people would be like, don't wear shorts on stage. And and then there was even like the old-fashioned thing, like you should wear a suit on stage, which like a couple people did. That's insane. And most of us thought that was crazy. But like,
I think even Louis did it at that point too, even though he was just like a black t-shirt guy for almost all of his career. Like you should be presentable. It's entertainment. But like that was pretty much long gone by the time I was doing it. But the shorts thing has stuck with me. I'm like, what is like what are you trying to accomplish? What are you dictating? What do you think is better or worse about comedy if somebody's wearing shorts? And like, how are you going to convince me that that's like a rule I need to live by? And like, especially if you were starting out in Michigan too, like Michigan produces an incredible number of shorts guys. You know, guys.
Oh God,
absolutely.
Who only wear shorts all the way through the winter.
Shorts right now.
Yeah.
I'm not wearing anything.
You should have written for Studio 60, Alec.
My dream. I would write for the real one or for a reboot.
Season 2 when? Season 2 when?
Jordan comes by Danny's hotel room to approach him about running the show, and there's like a really dumb like 10 to 15 minutes of will they, won't they, but of course they take it. And then there's really one of the biggest things that this all pulls together with is a brilliant speech. We love a brilliant speech, and
sure
Aaron
do.
Sorkin really loves a brilliant speech.
Here's St. Crispin's Day.
What is the deal with that? Like, what is the deal with all of the brilliant speeches?
The whole West Wing thing is that, rhetoric comes out in the end. Like, if I own you with logic hard enough, you will have no choice but to sit down and shut up. And a lot of Aaron's work doesn't make any sense, I don't think, unless you view it like a court case. Aaron has time and time again written courtroom dramas because it's a thing he's amazing at. Because you go up, present your argument, then the other side presents their argument, and the stronger argument, theoretically, would win in like a platonic ideal of a courtroom. And what he's done is take that logic of a courtroom and expand it to literally every aspect of every show he's ever written.
That makes sense because it was A Few Good Men that really put him on the map, right?
That's the thing.
Yeah.
And
Which was
to
a
this
play
day,
first.
A Few Good Men is still really the thing for Aaron Sorkin. That's the one that everyone knows.
Right.
Everyone knows you can't handle the truth.
Frankly, it rules.
Yeah, it's an incredible exchange. You have fucking Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson doing it. Like it's good. It's cinema.
If somebody in comedy tried to start giving a big brilliant speech, everybody would just fucking laugh at them for being so like high on their own supply, right?
I mean, I don't know what scenario anyone would be giving a speech in comedy that I'm
exactly
familiar with. Like, I don't have any experience being in like a big production like SNL. So I mean, maybe there where you do need everyone on the same page, it would serve a purpose ostensibly, but it's still insane. It's still like, I mean, I've worked on like TV shows where there's a whole crew and cast that need to work together and nobody's ever given a fucking speech. We have like safety meetings and that those kind of end with like, all right, well, let's do some good work today. Yeah, and that's all you need. Like working in comedy, working in drama, working whatever. If you're in TV, it's a job to you. I think certain things that are really popular, you might start to feel like a little more proud of while you're in it. But like at the end of the day, you really just want to do your job and get through the day. I don't want someone trying to pep me up that's very condescending. I don't like, just tell me what to do, keep us organized, make sure we're on the same page, and don't fuck us over. Like it is a job for everybody. Like the Grips, the electric team, like they don't fucking care. Right. Literally just there. Tell us where you want this light. What's the shot going to look like? Okay, well, we'll make sure it looks good. But if you don't know what you want, we're not going to do it. So shut the fuck up, stop giving a speech and tell us what you want.
But to him, the work is all. Your entire life is based on how well you do your job. And the ones that have to lead us, who lead us forward in comedy or politics or, in the news, their one like sole purpose in life is to be good at that job. And then there's like love on the side, kind of, but it's only love because they respect how well the other one does the job. I think what this show suffers from more acutely than a lot of the other ones that he's ever done is just that there is no emotional life outside of doing the comedy, and you need that to do good comedy, I think.
I also think like this is going backwards a little bit to like what it would have been like for the comedians, but I think most people on SNL or a big comedy show or anything like that are generally like, if they're not the ones making a lot of money or getting like a lot of the limelight, they're generally full of opinions on how this could be done better. They're bitching and moaning about like, fuck, I can't believe I have to do this way, or this is what I thought we should be doing. Like that's always happening at and that's going all the way down to the PAs where it's like, is this really the best way to do this? Like, I don't know. Like I remember like I worked on I Think You Should Leave, and that's like one of the few shows where everybody was reading the scripts and going, oh, this is actually funny. And that was a foreign feeling for a lot of us, like, to be on a show that we were like really sure was good. And at the same time, none of us thought anyone would ever watch it. And I remember thinking, like, there was like one ad that Netflix put up like 2 weeks before it aired, and that was the amount of that was the full extent of promotion they put into it. And I was like, oh, okay, so it's kind of a bummer. No one's gonna watch this. And like, also we made like no money, so no one was in a really good mood. Like the best, even on a show like that where the material's good and the star is likable and like we are happy with what we're doing. It was still hell for a lot of people because it paid like shit, and everyone's like, let's just get this fucking over with. We can't do the best job we want to do. And it still became, I mean, I don't know if I'm talking too out of school here, but like, yeah, it became a big hit. Everyone's really proud of it now.
Absolutely.
But like, nobody was, even on that, nobody was like, oh, what a good thing.
Yeah. And it's not like Tim was getting up in front of everybody at the beginning of every day and being like, here we go, folks.
That would have been, I don't like,
then you would have been like, oh, this is going to be a huge piece of shit. Yeah.
There's an element of like, it would be nice if like the people in charge acknowledge everybody and like make sure they know that they're like
they're
appreciated and valued. that's great. That's different from giving a speech. And like some shows we get that feeling, some shows we don't. But like a speech to me feels condescending for people doing their job.
Yeah. I will say this though, who does love a good speech? Theatrical actors. When you like that first day of rehearsal thing, when you pull everybody together and you go around the room and everybody says their name and then the director gives a big brilliant speech, that's necessary for a lot of people in order to feel comfortable in the world of theater, is what Aaron knows. Like, AJ, were there any big brilliant speeches during Farnsworth? I bet there was at least one, right?
Here's the thing. There were. On the opening day, Aaron stood up in front of all of us and gave an Aaron Sorkin speech. It wasn't quite as refined as his written stuff. It was a little bit more off the cuff, and it felt...
Not as many Wikipedia citations.
Here's the thing that was so interesting about him. When he's in his television world, there is this sort of like ego that has been attributed to him. But the theatrical world, he still feels, I think, a lot like a novice, because A Few Good Men did not do well as a play.
Oh, it was the movie that put it on the map.
It was the movie that put it on the map. And the Farnsworth Invention also did not do great when it went to Broadway. It got middling to like mixed reviews. It closed earlier than they thought they were going to.
Was To Kill a Mockingbird then his first real like stage hit?
It was. It was like his first bona fide stage hit. So when he talked to us in the room, when he gave that opening day speech, it was full of reverence for us and saying what you guys do is something I do not completely understand. I'm still in awe of theater, and the fact that you guys can take these words and make them work in a space with other people is just really incredible. Like, he made us feel valued, to your point, Alec. Like he really stood in front of us and propped us all up. Even a 17-year-old who did not know you could not wear a Borat shirt to your first day of a professional show. I was
wearing shorts, man. You better not have been wearing fucking shorts.
They made me change because the lead singer of the Flaming Lips came to that reading because Aaron was writing the book for Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots that Des was going to direct.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then that never happened.
They didn't end up using his book.
They sure did not. They sure did throw that one out. Yeah. And then Des McAnuff stood up and said, it's very rare that you get a rat to swim back to a sinking ship, but here we are. And it was wild.
I mean, that's something like theater presumably has existed as, like it wasn't always a product. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you just put on a show and it is like the community doing something for the community. So there is like something admirable about that. Yeah. Whereas TV has always just been,
it's a purely commercial enterprise.
It's a money situation. So like when you go to work on a play, you may or may not be getting paid, but I don't think anyone thinks they're going to get a lot of money working in like theater. So it still feels like a community thing. Whereas TV, you're in LA, you're in New York, you're trying to make rent, and this is a gig. Like, it's not the same thing. You don't need the pep talk. I'm amazed by what you do. Like, people are getting paid good money, presumably, hopefully. Yeah.
And in theater, money is fine.
Right. No, but genuinely,
I mean, it was the most money I'd ever seen in my entire life at that point in my bank account. But, it is, and La Jolla Playhouse does pay well. I do want to say that. They're a great institution. Support them.
Yeah, for a theater, though. Again, it's just a different kind of money.
Aaron got us all little key rings from Tiffany's as our opening night gift. And I looked at it as a 17-year-old and was like, what the fuck am I going to do with this?
After a series of big, brilliant speeches, there is a conclusion of, well, we're gonna put on a show, and oh, by the way, that sketch that got cut, remember that sketch that got cut? That one that was so controversial, Crazy Christians? Well, turns out Matt wrote it. And they're going to open with it next week. And then the opening bars of Under Pressure play for what felt like 10 minutes.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
And then again, setting the tone for the fix you scene.
It's not the end of the episode either, right? Like
it's not.
It feels like the episode's about to end and cut to black, and it doesn't. Like the song ends and then the show continues.
Like another 4 fucking minutes, literally.
Every episode does this too. Like it has an ending, and then it's 5 or even 10 minutes until you actually close out.
But then, Matt and Danny take the stage to give yet another fucking brilliant speech to everybody assembled, being like, and this is something that I could potentially see is like, we're the new head writers here. Here's what the show's going to be like.
That's valid. Absolutely.
And that's the end of the episode.
That reminds me of like when like we had a show that flipped, like the union flipped it, and it needed to be acknowledged by the people in charge. It's like if something that affects people's jobs, like, well, the head writer just got fired. Our job's in jeopardy. Like, you do need to come out and address that.
Yeah.
And it's also, so Bradley Whitford's character wants to get away from cocaine, so he decides to take a job directing a sketch comedy show. I just want to establish that.
Sorkin really knows his shit.
He
With
really
a harrowing schedule, too.
Yeah. My God, that ticking clock, which really comes into play in the next episode, I will say. But there's a couple of things I'd like to say about this first episode before we move on.
Go for it.
So I think my first question is, if the show were still running, would Sarah Paulson's character be an anti-vaxxer starring in a circus show in Nashville? I also really want to take this time to like sort of celebrate Matthew Perry's performance in the show, because I genuinely think it's great.
He's really good.
He's really good.
It's
very
fucked
good.
Up. It's
He's
really
very
fucked up. I think him and Bradley Whitford can carry me through the whole show. I
They absolutely
love
can.
them both in it.
They can both land those punchlines better than anyone, because a lot of Aaron's dialogue, because it is written so much in his voice, it really requires actors who are able to like fill out the rest of the character just by their own personalities. And I think that Matthew Perry is one of those actors. I mean, Bradley Whitford, we knew from The West Wing could carry this, but like Matthew Perry also was on The West Wing for a long time, but like really just nails this role and gives it everything he's got.
And like an insane thing about his performance too, I think he's the only one who's supposed to be funny who is convincingly funny.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
He will get zingers that like have good timing. They're not necessarily like funny, but they're like convincingly so.
Well, and convincingly too, to your point about like the nature of comedians, he has the sort of cutting wit that comedy writers have.
He's also the only depressed one there. Like,
Yes.
He's the only one I believe has ever existed in the world of comedy. Like all the cast members are theater kids who are in denial. They're like improv kids, which is maybe possible for SNL. They definitely hire improv people.
Sure, yeah. But I mean, he also carries like every good Sorkin protagonist worth their salt just has to look so tired all the time because the weight of their genius is like crushing them into the earth, you know? And, you know, no one does tired like Matthew Perry. And there's a punchline he has when he like finally runs into Harriet walking down the hallway in this pilot where he says, we have to delay this fight for 2 years, which he actually lands the plane on in a way that a lot of the jokes in this just kind of fall flat. Like he knows how to like drive to the end of the line.
He knows when a punchline, like there's even a joke in the second episode, which we'll get to in a second, but it's like he's telling the writers, and we already kind of talked about the scene where he's telling them to dress better. In that same scene, he says like, you know, we just need to keep this professional, no drama, no unprofessionalism at all. And then as soon as he says that on cue, Harriet comes in yelling at him, and then he stands up and does a very sitcom performance, like, and all of that will be beginning shortly.
Yeah.
And he marches out of the room. I mean,
it's like an awful joke. It's stupid, but like he sells it.
I think that there's this idea that he's supposed to be like a super neurotic guy, which I don't really buy. He doesn't give much of that energy. Instead, he just gives cranky energy, which is fine. Sure. I would argue that of the friends, if you wanted to cast a friend in this role to be that specific thing,
don't say David Schwimmer. That would be insane.
I am going to say David Schwimmer. That's right. No, I'm saying it. That's my opinion.
This is solidarity among theater people.
I think
it would be a very different performance.
Right, it absolutely would be a different character. But like, I'm going to argue. I can't believe I'm arguing in favor of Matthew Perry this much. But like, I don't care about Matthew Perry. But like the weariness he brings to it, and that like his neurosis in it is like a believable level.
And I think the performances across the board in this pilot are really good. And it seems like critics kind of like went nuts for this pilot.
Oh, they went absolutely apeshit for it.
Yeah.
They called it like the next big thing in television, right?
It's a promising pilot in some ways. It's really, here's what I feel about the show. And the pilot exemplifies this. Like, I think it's a misguided show. I think it has no idea what it's talking about, but I think it is the best possible version of the show it was trying to be.
This is not the worst thing we've watched on this show by any stretch of the imagination, but it is certainly the most misbegotten. Like,
and part of what I love about it is like we keep talking about the tension at play here, and it's like it's a well-made show with a lot of great performances and great camera work and like fast-paced dialogue that is interesting to listen to, whether it's talking about something that makes sense or not.
Right.
And like all of that works for me. And then the magic of it is that underneath the surface, the show is insane.
Yeah. I also compared it to like you're going bowling and every single time you hit the head pin and every single time you leave the 7-10 split. And at some point, you're just like,
it's like he consistently does it for all 10 frames.
You were straight down the middle. You left the 7-10 split every single time. You know how to get there, and you can't make the pins go down. Like, how?
And I will argue that the pilot is actually pretty strong, and I don't think it truly goes off the rails until the second episode. But Brian, what were you going to say?
Oh, I just want to read this for a second. This is from the New York Times when Studio 60 premiered. Yes. There was a lot more television than ever before, much of it bad. But it is hard to remember a time when there were so many good shows pushing up against the worst. Dramas, especially whether on cable or on broadcast networks, have never been as beautifully or thoughtfully made. Few Hollywood movies even come close. And Studio 60 serves as Exhibit A. It is gorgeously filmed with the kind of long, sweeping track shots that used to be associated with Martin Scorsese. And are now more often cited as a trademark of Thomas Schlamme, an award-winning director of The West Wing. Scorsese's shots are very different.
Very different.
Absolutely.
The camera moves in both types of shots.
It sure does.
Certainly.
The font is the same as The West Wing. They use the exact same font.
Trajan Pro.
Oh, lovely.
Wow. I'm actually impressed.
All you font heads out there, going down
I'm a dedicated font head. Yeah, that's Trajan. It's a signature of all of his shit.
It's my favorite Ayn Rand story.
He's a fountainhead, yeah. God damn it. Fountainhead. Dear God.
What's worse is that we were both coming up with the joke at the same time.
So terrible.
That's not good.
I would like to also take a moment to sort of reference, there's a lot of talk about like how Aaron writes basically ubermensch kind of characters, right? And I want to just take a moment to sort of push against that idea, because I don't think that he believes that they're superior beings. The characters on his shows are superior beings because they were born that way. I think that he...
Oh, yeah, absolutely not.
He is just like, anyone can do this. Right? Anyone can do what I do, what any of these people do. You just have to work hard. And if you work hard enough, you're going to get everything you want, which is why I think it's very interesting in the show when he goes off against bloggers who are saying bad things about the show or trying to take him down. It's like they're losers because they're not working as hard, because if they worked as hard as me, they would be as successful as me.
Yeah, there's a line where Simon Stiles is like, don't listen to that blogger. She's probably just sitting at home in her pajamas.
Yeah, and then they start calling them pajama people for the rest of the show. This is especially weird because The West Wing really took off because it was one of the first TV shows to have a dedicated online fan base.
Yes.
And in Studio 60, they even noted how big the online fan base for Studio 60 was. Not big enough to, have the show run for more than a season, but that was the key to his success. But and this shows up in the newsroom again because he hates commenters on news sites, which I mean we all do, but especially hates news sites that are just websites. He hates Gawker. He hates all of these things that are eroding society, which just involves people on the internet watching your TV show.
Yeah, I just want to say that there are 157 pages of fan fiction for Studio 60 on fanfiction.net.
I'll read all of them. I'll read every single word.
Yeah, a lot of it is actually very sweet. I mean,
is it a lot of Matt and Danny fucking? Is it a lot of
it's actually surprisingly little. It's a lot of Matt and Harriet, and they're all very pure because
how many of these did you read, AJ? You were many of them are actually quite nice. How many of the 167 pages did you delve into?
Josh, I read enough.
Okay. That many pages. I could knock that in an afternoon.
Yeah.
He read about half of it because he actually wrote all the rest.
Yeah, I sure did. Yeah. But there is a nice fan fiction sort of tension between Matt and Harriet because, it's a forbidden love, right? She actually can't sleep with him because that would be against her morals as a Christian, even though
not really though, because she talks about she fucks.
Yeah, in the show she's just I'm fine with premarital sex. It doesn't bother me. It's between me and God, But I think there was an AV Club article that talked about My Year of Flops, I believe it's called. He says after the pilot, the show could be anything. It could do anything.
Yeah. So once we get back from the break, we'll find out how exactly it went.
And right when we get back from this week's sponsor,
oh God,
my fiance?
Hey, listeners. Ellie Phillips here. You may be familiar with me from the Josie and the Pussycats episode. I come to you, listeners, with a problem. A Studio 60 problem. It started small. AJ watched all of it in preparation for this episode, which I need to stress he absolutely did not have to do. And when he finished, he just put it back on the TV. He just went back to rewatch episodes, and he kept saying things like, "This one is actually good though," and muttering about how he's gonna turn Macau into the Las Vegas of East Asia. Anyway, I've tried to speak to him directly, but he just keeps asking me to become a sunset stripper like him, so I have decided to take out a commercial in order to beg for your help. Oh, and side note, if you'd like to buy ad space on this podcast, you apparently need to fill an unmarked envelope with $5,000 cash and quote, "your wettest meats," end quote, and take it to the corner of Clinton and Bryant Street in Red Hook, where a man in a long trench coat and a face you can't quite see will take the envelope and put it into his trench coat, and you'll swear you hear the sounds of ferocious chewing from within, but think it impolite to ask, and then he'll give you a link to a Google Drive and a novelty pen that says property of Celino and Barnes before Naruto running away down the street. So please understand, I didn't do this lightly, but AJ has started making me just walk the length of our apartment whenever we have discussions and gets frustrated that the ambient sounds don't do it like WG Snuffy Walden does it. And when I said that couldn't possibly be a real name, he told me to get the Sork in or get the Sork out, and thrust a piece of paper in my hand that just had business document written on it. I know some of you have a hard time hearing the difference between AJ, Brian, and Josh. Well, now I cannot tell the difference between AJ, Bradley Whitford, and Matthew Perry. And every time AJ does anything around the apartment, he stands back and looks down at what he's done with a satisfied little smile, just like Matthew Perry after Very Model of a Modern Network TV show in episode 2, The Cold Open, which is a fact that I know now, very much against my will. And now he is starting on his third rewatch because he's totally Jordan-pilled. I'm begging you, listeners, please don't encourage this. There was a time, pretty recently, when he was so excited about rewatching Lost. "There's so much there," he said. So what do you say, friends? Let's all get really amped about Lost. Nay, let's demand Lost content from AJ in the hopes that we can once again forget that Matthew Perry's character's last name is Albee, and that the utterance of the words "The West Wing" shouted at Alice and Jenny during her guest appearance signaled to me a complete collapse of time and space. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Look, I'm not original or smart or funny or nice or good or anything.
Wow.
It's my favorite Sondheim lyric.
In the immortal words of Matthew Perry as Matt Albee, mazel.
For what?
Not being any of those things.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm.
And a mazel to you as well.
Oh, thank you.
God mazel us, everyone.
I cannot believe at one point Bradley Whitford screams at Matthew Perry that to ask him to be a little bit more Jewish about it.
Yeah.
I get the impression from this show that Aaron, we're back.
We're back, everybody. Hey, how's it going?
That Aaron, who is Jewish, has never met a Jew. He has also never met a Christian, despite being inside at least one Christian multiple times.
Oh boy!
I have so many questions about that as we go now into episode 2, The Cold Open, about how Aaron Sorkin seems to have never met a Christian before.
Yeah, or anyone like of any religious practice
ever.
That's how his writing always comes across. Even though I'm pretty sure all these conversations with Sarah Paulson's character, Harry, are fully based on conversations that he had with Kristen Chenoweth when he was dating her.
What do we think this show is about? I know that's a weird one to come back from.
It's a really good question because there isn't a good answer at all because it's not. It's literally just him like, oh, this would be a good premise, and then charging forward.
Yeah, blind into the dark, swinging his sword, killing people on the way.
There is a lot of Aaron Sorkin working through his shit. There's just a certain way that he writes. He can't get out of that mind prison.
Yeah.
He has a very specific style. And it's always going to be there. Even if he works with a big ass writer's room, the way that he takes those scripts is he always filters them back through himself, completely rewrites someone else's script as his own, and then he will put it aside, not look at it, and rewrite it again from memory. So it is a purely like Aaron Sorkin product.
Right.
And so what you get a lot of repeated things. You get a lot of quips that will show, like there's a YouTube supercut of like specific lines that have been repeated over the course of his career. Because that's, and it's not like
the rhythms he hit.
We were meant to be explorers.
He's not doing it on purpose. There's even 2 points in this one season of a show where someone says fraction of a man. They call someone a fraction of a man, which is such a bizarre thing to say in the first place, much less twice in separate episodes.
He uses feckless a lot. I love feckless. It's such a good word.
There's just like, he has a sort of hacky way of writing that's just how he's going to address anything, even when it gets too personal and too uncomfortable. It's like watching Glenn or Glenda.
Well, and one such instance of this writing is right here at the very beginning of episode 2. You know, it opens with a press conference. Aaron Sorkin loves a good press conference.
Oh, he loves them.
Loves it to bits. You know, Jordan, again, we will remember she is the president she's the head of programming at the network. She's meeting the press because it's a brand new job, and also people are wondering about the whole like turnover at Studio 60, about like the fucking
the big Wes Mandel blow up just
exactly
happened.
His network moment. And so she goes ahead and introduces Matt and Danny, and it's like, hey, here's the new guys. And Danny immediately is like, yep, I did a whole bunch of cocaine.
Yep. Just blurts it out in front of everyone.
Yeah. This is his I am Iron Man moment, basically.
And I forget, is this the moment where Rapture Magazine stands up and asks the question?
Yes. It is.
In terms of naming conventions, this is an all-timer for me. A woman stands up representing Rapture Magazine and introduces herself as Constance Gower.
The nature of this journalist or whatever is supposed to be an offended member of the Christian right who, again, is really mad about crazy Christians.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. This sketch, the legendary crazy Christian sketch, which apparently he wrote before leaving the show years ago. They were only going to produce like last week.
Yeah. What's crazy about crazy Christians, Alec?
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
First of all, has there ever been a sketch on SNL that like people were really controversially just like, oh, what the fuck did they just
like
do
actually mad about? I certainly can't think of
I don't
one.
think there ever has been.
No, I mean, other than just people generally being mad about like impressions of Trump.
Yeah, people might think like a sketch sucks or that they like are platforming bad people, which are always very valid complaints.
Yeah.
But like, there's never been like a sketch that offended the American moral fiber to the degree that Crazy Christian seems to be doing.
Right.
And on top of that, it is really important to remember this sketch hasn't aired.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I guess they imply the script has leaked and like the description of it is leaked. But like people don't usually like care to like find out what the next new sketch on SNL is going to be.
I think what's weird about it too is that not only do we never see it, we never really get even a description of what it is.
Yes,
honestly.
They completely avoid it. It's a cowardly move. I will never respect the show for not doing it.
Yeah.
Like my favorite thing out of everything about watching this show is freeze framing it when they're looking at the board of all the sketches.
I wrote them all down.
Yeah, I do too. I do too.
If you look through my Twitter, I used to like, whenever I rewatch it, I would always like tweet out the pictures of the sketches again.
There's a board in the background on the set that says Jamaican Me Crazy Barbecue. Centaur the Courier.
Yeah.
That kind of feels like it could be 80s SNL, actually.
Yeah, I think that's probably has the most legs on it.
Like
literally.
I deliver mail and I'm half a horse.
There's one that says like Julia Child's Child, which is like incredible. That feels SNL to me.
Yeah, it's one joke, but it could, you could see it happening.
There's two on here that are making me laugh just by looking at. One of them is beating up Rudy.
Yes. Which I think is a Cosby Show thing, because they do a lot of Cosby impressions.
I think it's probably Rudy Giuliani.
I thought it was instead of giving him jerseys at the end of Rudy.
Yeah, I thought the diminutive football player played by
I like that we all went in different directions on that one.
Wow.
Well, and I would assume most of these sketches, these stickers that are on the board were probably dreamt up by the production design team.
Yeah, maybe.
Not always, though.
Maybe.
Like, sometimes they do get referenced, and sometimes they are like part of the plot in a way.
Yeah.
Right, because
the Commedia dell'arte sketch. I will say, I will say, for whatever reason, the one that made me laugh was the one called Vacuum Championship, just because I don't know what it means, and I love the world of possibilities that is implicit in that title.
Matador bank teller.
Yeah, because Centaur the courier made it through, so you can't have Centaur the courier and Matador bank teller
for sure.
Tossed salad, extremely hard copy, the DGA awards.
Really enjoying looking at these.
Which points up another issue with this show, which is that the sketches are not funny. By any stretch of the imagination, they're not funny. And making it even weirder is the fact that when they are shown, the timing of the laugh,
the laughs are so
and the timbre
weird.
of the laugh is wrong. It's just wrong. There's no other way to put it.
Like, favorite thing in the show, because like looking at the sketches is the one thing, but this is the other big one, is getting to see a peek. They're too scared to show you a full sketch.
Yeah, they are not confident. They know that the sketches are bad.
Right.
They know they're bad, and they also know they need to show them sometimes. So you get snippets. You get them like in the background or like as exposition at the start of a scene, like an establishing shot. Like you see the beginning of a sketch and the camera whips over to characters talking.
Yeah.
And they're always the most surreal experience. Like it's a sketch that's not written to be funny, but to imply that sketches exist in this world.
Yes.
To do like a cursory impression of SNL.
It's like you described the concept of a sketch to somebody who doesn't understand what jokes are and what humor is. And then they tried to reconstruct it from memory. It's the weirdest fucking thing. And then the timing on the laughs, because of the fact that they weren't actually shooting it in front of a live studio audience, means that they had to sweeten it later on. But because the jokes aren't funny.
They don't know where to put them.
And so where the laugh happens is uncanny because it just isn't where it would happen. Like
it's a David Lynch sketch show. Yeah. All the lines are out of order.
This even happens during the network monologue, right? The audience keeps laughing. It's like, no, stop laughing. But it's like they're not laughing. Even at the end of the line.
Right.
Like, even if it's not funny, just put it at the end of the line. Yeah. But he's like 3 syllables in and they're already going.
The laugh comes often before the line finishes.
It gives this weird sense that you are not in the real world.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it throws everything off kilter. Like it doesn't seem like it should, but like this has the power to completely derail the entire show for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And
I need a supercut of just all of the sketches.
I literally almost did that once. I was like just gonna start posting them.
Aaron has an excuse that he uses a lot when asked about the sketches on Studio 60 and saying, well, what we're seeing is the dress, right? We're seeing all the rehearsals for it, and so they're supposed to be bad because they're still being refined.
Not always.
That's not the issue.
That's not always the case. A lot of the time we're seeing the show as it happens.
We do see one full sketch actually in this episode, which is less of a sketch and more of a musical number. This whole episode is like Matt is frantically trying to figure out what to write for this first episode.
He doesn't have a cold open. Right. He doesn't have a cold open, he can't write the rest of it.
That's the thing that the whole episode hangs on. Without a cold open, how are we going to know that the show is different, that it's under new management, that we want to do something exciting and artistic and fucking fulfilling with it? Because again, it's this idea that they care about like this really high-minded bullshit and they want to change the face of America through comedy or whatever.
and the insane part about this is when they finally figure out what to do. This is Sorkin's idea of what this like seasoned TV comedy writer is going to come up with.
Yep.
An homage to a Broadway musical.
Yes.
Like
not even an operetta.
A 19th century British operetta
about this.
Alec, how dare you not know the difference between a musical and an
That's
operetta?
My fucking point. Is
Moliere also didn't have anything to do with Commedia, Alec. Just in case you didn't know.
The fucking Commedia jokes made me want to fucking rip my own goddamn balls off. I hated it.
But you're right,
I hated that I knew what they were talking about.
But they shouldn't. They shouldn't know any of this. This doesn't make sense.
These characters should know as much as I know about this. This should be an insane thing for them to reference, let alone have 2 other people in the room know what they're talking about, and let alone decide this is going to be the big idea. Let alone have it actually work and be a hit for the show, and everyone nodding going, we did it. We fucking pulled it off.
Yeah.
So that's where this episode is going. We will get there, and we will talk about this more in excruciating detail when we get there. But I agree, like fucking insane.
So we start getting a little bit more backstage stuff. We start learning a little bit more about Harriet and her relationship to the rest of the cast.
And her relationship to the Lord.
Yes,
our Lord.
She's just not given a whole lot to do. I don't I keep watching this thinking, I don't think this is particularly fair to like Christian Chenoweth because I feel like Christian Chenoweth is also, first of all, you cast Sarah Paulson in this role. She's supposed to be a singer, like a really great singer, fully like comedic, top of her class.
Like Kristen Chenoweth.
And they just don't give her anything to show that off. I don't know if Sarah Paulson can do that.
Let's explain this Kristen Chenoweth thing. Yes. So she worked on The West Wing in, I don't know what season she came on.
In the post-Aaron years. She started working on it after Aaron had already left.
But somewhere along the way, they started dating during that period of time. Yeah, so Chenoweth and Sorkin had broken up not too long before Studio 60 was being made, and it seems like he's mostly just trying to relitigate that relationship in some strange way.
Absolutely.
And work through it. It's a lot of him working through his demons in the show.
This is the darkness that's bubbling beneath the surface, where it is like a bad man trying to publicly reckon with what he's done and make sure people know he's not a bad man.
He's just a flawed man.
I'm not bad. I'm nice, actually.
So Kristen Chenoweth is from small town Oklahoma. The town where she was from, I forget the name of it. It's about 100,000 people now, but it was like 5,000 back when she was born. I don't know how Christian she is currently, but I guess she's probably still evangelical Christian, but like she's not a political reactionary, but they keep bringing up her Christianity as being like a big barrier because of homosexuality and stuff, even though Sorkin in his writing and in his analog characters in his own show are way more homophobic.
But they're homophobic in a way that makes sense, Brian, and that is a quote from the show.
It feels like so much of this religious angle is fueling a lot of plot lines, especially for both of those characters. And it's all shit that I think isn't interesting. Like you guys talked about like the studio stuff not being interesting. I think this is less interesting than that. And it's weirdly looping back around to being like one of the strangest parts of the show now, because so much lip service is spent talking about they both have arguments that they bring to the table about like they sound reasonable if you're not thinking very hard, like
back when everyone would get into arguments on YouTube comments at here in 2006,
it's like Harriet Hayes going like, I didn't do that show for the racists who host it, I did it for the audience that watches it. And it's like, well, I guess whatever, like, fine. And then Matt will be like, well, you were on that show performing for basically the KKK. I'm like, well, no, chill out. Like, both of them have, like, poor arguments, and they sound like people who aren't thinking through what they're talking about. Like, it's really unsatisfying to hear, like, people not come to a relationship and actually put effort in. Like, and it sounds like Sorkin himself is not putting effort into these thoughts.
Right.
But it's also seemingly about stuff he's actually dealt with to a degree. So it's even weirder that it's not informed. Like,
yeah, exactly. That's what makes me wonder is like, to what extent is this informed by personal experience, Because is it just that in his relationship with Kristen Chenoweth, he never really tried to understand her faith? Because that's certainly what it seems like.
But his arguments don't seem like he's thought them through either.
Exactly.
So it's like,
it's all just like magical sky fairy shit. It's so irritating.
It feels like nothing is being said or discussed. I'll kind of give it a little bit of credit. Like the atheism versus religion thing was kind of like relevant at this point. Like it feels very quaint. It feels very quaint now, but like this is pre Ricky Gervais doing like 4 HBO specials about how Noah's Ark is a silly idea, and it's like, okay, dude, we know.
And then the entirety of the invention of lying.
Oh my god, yeah.
Yep. And and was it Bill Maher who did Religulous? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah, and they name checked Bill Maher too.
Well, and that was specifically because of the one like correct thing Bill Maher ever said, which was that the hijackers on 9/11 weren't cowards, because a coward doesn't like actually fucking suicide bomb something, right? A coward does something that has no consequential impact on their own life or their own body. And that got politically incorrect, his show at the time, canceled, and has left us stuck with Bill Maher, the fucking martyr, ever since.
There is a very effective scene, I think, near the end of the series where it's Harriet Hayes and it's Matt Albee in his office, and they're talking about how they've had the same fight for 6 years. Yeah. And then it cuts to them having the exact same fight over the course of 6 years, and just time jumping like in between lines that I found was very effective, because it was in that moment that I realized, oh, the fighting is actually what they love. Like, this relationship is built on this one fight, and it's these two people coming to the realization that, oh, maybe that's a terrible thing to build a relationship on, and maybe we need to start fresh with something different.
Sure, but crucially, I don't think the show realized that until that moment, if they even did.
Yeah.
So up until then, it's not serving that narrative purpose
at all.
Yeah,
no,
and
for
that's a save, if anything.
Yeah, and a lot of this show kind of feels like trying shit out and then seeing if it sticks, and if it doesn't, we abandon it.
Which I love.
Matt Albee has an imaginary friend for an episode.
He sure does.
Oh my god, I forgot about that. Yeah.
They do the ending of The Shining. Like that episode is so weird because it's like the first real flashback episode. There's one that kind of starts at the end and then ends in the middle and goes back to the beginning in the middle of the first part of the two-parter. But this episode flashes back to when everyone is younger, and you can tell because Matt Albee is wearing a hat backwards.
Yeah, he turns into Luke from Gilmore Girls.
It's the opposite of wearing glasses to show that time has passed. You put on a backwards cap to show that you've gone back in time.
I was like, Ben Platt.
And when they go back half as far to like when he was previously on the show, but just before he got fired, he's still wearing a hat, but it's forwards.
Yeah.
So there's this very gradual rotation of the hat until it's finally removed.
Yeah, we missed all the other moments where it was slowly turning.
That's a theater move. It's very interesting because that's a very cool staging trick. Like in order to age someone on stage, like do that's fine, but on screen it's like what's happening?
So he has this moment where like he sees another writer who's packed his shit up and leaving. He's like, I got fired for doing drugs, and he's like, oh man, but you're one of the best writers here. And then like at the end of the episode, we realize that writer didn't exist, and Matt Albee just decided that he needed someone else in his psyche to be doing the pills that he himself was doing. And he has a moment where he's looking at a fucking picture like at the end of The Shining, and it's him standing not wearing a hat backwards, but wearing the clothes of that fucking guy who was leaving at the beginning of the episode. Why? I don't know. I don't know what that accomplishes.
It's really, really great writing. It's really beautiful.
Where was Aaron Sorkin at this point in his life? Because I think that helps explain the lion's share of what's going on here, right? Like the anger, the inability to find a consistent thread. The fact that unlike most of his work, here it is so clearly something that is coming from like this personal, like I need to write my way through this shit. You know, there's a lot of other things about his writing that I don't care for, but he is generally really good at staying in the world of the show rather than bringing his own bullshit into the show. And in this case, it's so clearly his own bullshit on display all the time.
Through multiple characters.
And then he took the worst lessons away from it and applied those to the newsroom. That's the craziest
The
thing.
newsroom is important to talk about here because it does feel like the superpowered version of this show.
Yeah, this became his practice round that became the newsroom.
Yeah. If I can relitigate my old relationships, I can relitigate the fucking news.
Right.
I can change the world. Right? I gave this failed relationship a happy ending. Right?
Yeah.
I made a Hollywood romance out of heartbreak. So why can't I save the heartbreak of this nation and give the nation a happy ending with the newsroom by accurately reporting the news? Because here's the thing too, is in between that and newsroom is Social Network, right?
Which I like.
Which is one of the greatest movies ever made.
It is now one of the greatest movies ever made.
Yeah, Josh, we know Top Gun Maverick is the greatest movie ever made.
The reason why is because the Social Network deals with what happens, like what are the actual consequences of being the smartest guy in the room. You end up alone and sad.
And it's actually about something important.
Yeah.
Like, it's a return to him writing about things that matter.
It's an adaptation of a real story with real people who made real decisions, and so he's able to map his dialogue onto things that are not in this bizarre fantasy world.
And it's a good choice of style to apply to that story, in my opinion.
Yes. I remember when The Social Network came out, everyone was like, well, this is too hard on Mark Zuckerberg. And now, in retrospect, it's clear that, if anything, he didn't go hard enough. He saw, clearly, Sorkin saw something going on there. He was, in this case, a very accurate judge of character and wrote something true. And I think that's what's interesting, too, is like one of the things that makes Studio 60 such a fucking insane experience is that almost none of it rings true. It feels very, very false the vast majority of the time.
He's never been more wrong. Well, no, that's part of what I love about the show. And it's really not me being like, the show's so bad it's good. I'm not like, I don't like the show ironically. I love watching it because it's this weird like synthesis of terrible decisions, good execution, like a dark core, like a bad man going through his worst period and trying to like you said, relitigate like how he feels about himself, how he wants you to think about himself through multiple characters of the show. It's got so much going on that feels evil. And on top of that is also just wildly confident. I've never seen a more confident show get more things wrong about its own subject matter.
It's manic, like said, isn't it? It feels very manic.
Well, it would be like one thing if it got everything wrong. But we've already talked about he gets like the relationship with actors right. He gets the details of television production right.
Right. Yeah.
So like it's the mix of the things that work and the things that don't that feels really compelling to me. There's a two-parter where they go into like with John Goodman in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
They have to deal with like
baby.
rural America for a second. So they try to talk about that.
Yep.
They try to talk about the war. They try to talk about the prestigious lineage of comedy. They try to talk about like networks.
The whole fucking Who's On First thing with
that is one of my favorite
people
bits.
from like Ohio who have for some reason never heard of Who's On First. Like
these are people in their 60s in like the year 2000. They know exactly what Who's On First is. They saw it live.
And it's so sinister because like Nate Cordry's character there, Tom Jeter, is walking through the studio showing his parents this studio that they filmed Studio 16 that he has so much reverence for, that they shot all these amazing comedies here. They
memorized all the architecture shit about the building, every dimension.
They've never seen a TV show. They're like, I just want to talk about corn and the president. Like
that's the thing you really immediately see is like how insane this disconnect is of like this family that is so disappointed in their son for being a hoity-toity comic. No, they'd be so thrilled that their kid's on TV.
Yeah, everyone watches TV.
They're also like really mad that their son like doesn't appreciate that their other son is out fighting for America.
Yeah.
Which is
this episode ends with like this outburst where his dad's just like,
well, that's swell, Tom, but your brother's standing in the middle of Afghanistan.
Well, the under discussed part about this is how much fucking Kool-Aid Tom Jeter has drank here. Like, this is like not like I'm sure there are people on SNL who are just like fully in it like this, but this guy is so fucking in love with being on this show. And I've been in situations like I worked at Absolutely for many years, and when I first showed up, I was interning and I was starry-eyed. And I'm like, this is amazing. This is where they made Tim and Eric. This is where they made Nathan for You, Eric Andre show. I'm like, I'm a fresh-eyed LA kid. Do you know the people who are not like that at all? The people who are at the top who've been there for the longest. So like this cast member would be the most jaded one there. He would not care about any of this. It's like you talk to a PA there, maybe that's what they'll tell their parents. But like, the mythos that it builds around Studio 60 and how much every character believes in it and treats it like what they're doing is the most important thing in the world. Is literally just like to me, it reads as a byproduct of The West Wing. It's like all of his characters think and are probably much more accurate in thinking this, that like what they are doing is of grave importance because they're dealing with global issues and a country like that depends on their decisions, and applying that same level of gravitas to SNL is so fucking funny to me the whole way through the series.
Wild.
Because it's like you said earlier, Alec, people who have been on SNL will still talk about the institution. They will talk about what it did for them. They will talk about if they had a good experience with it. They'll, I think, particularly do that because they want to continue to have access to Lorne Michaels' money, honestly.
Right, you can't like bite the hand that feeds in that situation.
And that makes sense, right? But there's such a gap between those things, and it also comes back to this question of like, what is work to people? There's this whole back and forth with like, there's a fucking affiliate in Terre Haute, Indiana that's refusing to show Studio 60 because of crazy Christians. And it's like, and so they're just filled with this sense of importance. Like, we've got to do the show. And it's like, none of this would ever fucking happen.
What's crazy is the closest analog I can think of in real life that SNL has ever gone through is, and this is something that was announced pre-show, is having Trump host. And the country had taken note and had a lot of thoughts on it. And I'm sure the people on the show had very conflicted thoughts. Like that's the only instance I can think of, and it's not about like a sketch that leaked early.
There's a little bit later on in the series where two of the like fledgling sketch writers are trying to write a sketch, and Mark McKinney's character, Andy Mackinoff, named after Des Mackinoff, the director of the Farnsworth Invention, a man who is presented as being deeply unfunny and totally serious, which. Yeah.
An extremely dry Canadian man.
Basically, Andy Mackinoff says, I don't know what the premise is on the first page. If I don't buy the premise, I don't buy the sketch. And the thing about so many episodes of this show is that I don't buy the premise.
Right.
Yeah. And therefore, I can't buy the sketch. I can't buy the rest of the episode.
You don't buy the premise of Kristen Chenoweth getting attacked by militant homos on a sidewalk, which then leads to Rob Corddry's brother getting arrested, and then he has a standing warrant because he went 120 on a Nevada highway because he was bringing supplies to Area 51. You don't follow that premise?
Excuse me, Brian. They're called gay street toughs and gay hooligans at various points.
You also didn't finish it, Brian. Not only does that happen, but then he also ends up getting tried in a kangaroo court by John Goodman. Like it's wild.
Perfect. It's the best TV.
The thing is, he doesn't understand what Middle America is like. He does understand what Nevada is like. It's exactly like that.
Like, my favorite thing about the John Goodman shit is like he gets out of it because he realizes that his brother is a soldier. Like, it's this like, you big city boys, you always think you know what you're talking about. You don't get us people down here, but I'm going to let you off the hook because one of you knows someone who's fighting for our country.
But let's take it back now again to the events of the cold open.
The White Stripes are coming. Oh no, they're not. Jack White has laryngitis and their go-to backup is the Stone Temple Pilots.
Oh no. What are they going to do? They're having trouble finding a musical guest. They don't have a cold open and they need music. Wait, hold. What if they could have the music? Mm-hmm. And the cold open.
I don't have a cold open. And unless we find bin Laden between now and Friday night, we're going to have people's attention for the open. It needs to be too many things. What does it need to be? Self-deprecating, an acknowledgement, and an acceptance.
A message from the producers?
Should be on a grand scale.
What's a grand scale?
A song, a big song, a musical number.
All right.
Should pay respect to where we are, this studio, this city.
Keep talking.
I'm trying.
We take the show seriously, but we don't take ourselves seriously.
That's right.
We screwed up, but we won't do it again.
Yeah.
We'll be model citizens.
We'll be a model. We'll be a model. You know who did the best frat humor of all time?
Rudy Valley.
Groucho Marx.
It was W.S. Gilbert.
We'll be the very model of a modern network TV show.
We hope that you don't mind that our producer was caught doing blow.
Yes?
Yes! What do we have that says legacy of television? Like Arturo Toscanini and the NBC Orchestra.
Jay!
What do we have that says...
Jay! I'm just coming to see you. I'm on hold with Clay Aiken's manager.
Then hang up the damn phone.
We need John Mocheri and the West Coast Philharmonic.
We're also gonna need the LA Light Opera Chorus, and if you can't get them, try the LA Phil or the USC or UCLA Orchestra.
Whoever it is, it's gotta be Los Angeles. They gotta be able to play. Is this a joke?
We're counting on it.
No.
Okay, now we just need to write the song and the rest of the show.
And then everyone in the room like pitches one extra thing for it, and they all turn, and then they're like, yes, and it's like this magic moment.
It does rhyme with doing blow, yes.
Yeah. The bit where they're telling Danny Tripp the musical guest canceled that Jack White is sick.
Thing, yeah.
He starts listing off replacements, and he goes, Stone Temple Pilots, and then the PA goes, or whoever it is goes, well, they broke up 3 years ago, and Danny Tripp walks away. Before she's even finished saying that, get him back together, I don't care, is a moment that is familiar to anyone who's worked in TV, where a producer or somebody in charge doesn't care how it gets done. They're asking the impossible.
Yeah.
And anyone who's worked in TV knows that sucks so fucking much to have to deal with.
I would imagine.
In this show, it's treated like he's the hero.
It's so charming and good.
It's a charming thing for him to have done. It's a funny way to have handled that, and it's like they're fucking wrong for not being able to solve this with me. Like, they don't get how this works. Like, why are they wasting their time telling me they can't do things? And I'm supposed to sympathize with that.
But then, it all goes back to Aaron's ethos, right? The idea that if you work hard enough, the impossible can be achieved.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's really twisted. It's all so anti, like, the little man.
It goes back to that evil core that you were talking about earlier, Alec. Like, it's a really good example of that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that core really shows its head with D.L. Hughley's character specifically, because this is a black man who came from the ghetto and worked hard enough that he got himself to be like this huge star, right?
So we're going to jump forward to an exchange that happens in a future episode that also, I think, informs a lot about the way that this episode wraps up.
There's a situation where they want to hire another black writer for the show.
Right.
Yes.
And D.L. Hughley is the
black writer for the show.
A black writer. At least one, because D.L. Hughley is the only black star on the show, and he's getting frustrated that there's no writers that can write to his black voice. Very legitimate problem to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is treated as a nuisance every time it's brought up. But Matt Albee eventually generously decides to go with D.L. Hughley to a comedy club to scout out some upcoming black comics that they can bring on to write for the show.
Yes.
And they go to a club, and there's a comedian there, a black comic on stage, doing like what I would consider like Def Jam material, just like classic material about what it's like to be black.
Yeah, I mean, very typical for the time.
It's also kind of like the Bizarro World version of that, because again,
it's heightened.
It's heightened, and it also somehow manages to not be funny. Like the logic,
because a lot of that is personality based. A lot of it is like really charming. Like a lot of those comedians are just so immediately likable on stage and have huge personalities that even if they're not really telling a joke, you're like, I'm on board with this guy.
Which is also what makes this even more weird, of course, is the fact that D.L. Hughley, like we mentioned before, is one of the original kings of comedy. And so, it's that.
For him, this episode must have been insane.
Oh, God. Because much like John Ennis in that writer's room. It's like a fucking inversion of the lived experience.
We have to get to the fact that, like, while this comedian's doing this bit, D.L. Hughley gets visibly disappointed and embarrassed.
He starts crying.
His reaction is like, I fought so hard. I dragged Matt Albee out here to hire a new black comic, and this awful comedian is what we have to listen to. And it's just your average black comedian.
He's fine.
It is
the music underneath it is like so dour and sad.
It's treated like one of the worst. It's treated like a city just got nuked. Like, it's so awful that this happened.
Yeah.
And they're about to give up, and they're arguing, and D.L. Hughley's like, I'm sorry. I guess we can't hire a black writer if they're all going to be like this. Like, I didn't. Yeah. I don't
personally know anybody that we could maybe hire. Like
what the fuck?
And then while they're having this conversation, somebody is bombing on stage.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is somebody. It is a black comedian who is clearly like a Harvard type comedian who is doing cerebral material that is not going to play well in a black comic club. Like,
that doesn't have any jokes in it.
No jokes. But what they respond to is the fact that, like, he's a little clever. He's a little. He's and I'm going to say this bluntly. He is writing the way that Matt Albee envisions comedy should be written, and he's a white guy, and he relates to this material because it's not the Def Jam material. And when they hear that, they're both like, now there we go. There's a black comedian we can hire because he's writing material that traditionally passes as white.
Yes. And we never see, again, because we can't really see the sketches. And also because at this point, there's now two writers in the writer's room. They had like one writer. Now there's two writers because they hired this guy who they saw bomb on stage. You never see any of his work.
Right.
Because the show can't showcase it.
No, it's literally, it cannot back up the premise that it's given you, which is like, this is the good kind of comedy, and they made the right choice hiring this black writer instead of the other one. Like,
the only sketch that actually goes up by him is co-written with Dawn from The Office, and it bombs. Its purpose is to crash and burn.
But this is the thing that happens in the show all the time, which is like, they will very confidently stumble into a misguided idea that Aaron Sorkin really believes in. Of course, under any scrutiny, that idea falls apart. And that's one thing if you're just watching the show and thinking about it, but it's another thing if you need to follow up with it with plot points.
Right.
So those things just get abandoned, because if you were to explore it further, it would fall apart.
And a lot of those little bits end up falling around D.L. Hughley's character for whatever reason. He tends to be the one who gets saddled with a lot of these weird little subplots about weird little things. I don't understand ultimately who he is really supposed to be as a character. He largely exists as a device. In his core purpose, much like pretty much everybody else in the show, is to set up Matt as being this great and glorious, amazing writer guy who just gets it. In Danny, this great and amazing director producer who also just gets it. But because of the way that the show is written, it's always telling us and never showing us.
Oh yeah, like the whole cast reveres them.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Every crew member, every cast member in the Studio 60 world never questions that Danny and Matt are geniuses.
Right.
And they're reminding us at every turn, which is such a Sorkin thing to do.
And again,
even the other showrunners, like the ones they oust are like, oh God, he gets results. Poor dear Evan Handler just gets fucking thrown to the curb.
You build them up as these hacky villains, and they're like, they don't get any dignity at all.
It's perfect that we get a full sketch. This is the one time we really get a sketch in this show, and it is the cold open here at the end of episode 2 that is so perfect in understanding what Aaron Sorkin thinks comedy is.
It's a big moment. It is a lens, yeah.
So let's set this up visually first, in terms of what we see before the thing even starts, right? We go backstage. Again, there's this pre-show huddle. They're like fucking, again, this is a theater kid thing, right? Like they're holding hands and fucking being
Harriet praise. Yeah.
Oh my God. And they are all wearing all white because they want to look classy or whatever, right?
They look like a glee club.
They do.
The premise of this bit is that they have to be presentable. Like they're
right.
The reputation of Studio 60 at this point is in the gutter because it just kind of like
what's
self-destructed.
awful is what you just said actually scans perfectly with the song lyrics. The premise of this show is that they have to be presentable. And,
I thought you meant logically. I didn't think you meant literally.
The actual scansion, and that makes my head hurt.
So it's got like this Follies set to it. It's got like giant stairs that come down. Community theater Follies set. Oh God, the kids are really gonna knock it out of the park and Footloose this year using this little number. They're all set up. They don't do like any choreography whatsoever. They clasp their hands in front of them like they're singing in a choir. They do a little marching.
Funny. It's so funny. That's what we all know. This is
so Matt or Danny, one of them, I don't remember which, was like, we need to make this the most LA thing imaginable. We need we need a chorus. We need the USC marching band.
We need a Philharmonic.
They want it to be a big spectacle for their comeback.
Right. And so they have now also conscripted the services of a chorus and also a band, not their own
band. It's an expensive looking bit for the in the actual production.
I was going to say
expensive sounding because they went with MIDI.
But
they sure did.
But again, this show did have a budget of I want to say like $3 million an episode, which is still a lot now. And back in 2006 was an insane amount of money.
They really pushed it for this one. It sounds awful. It sounds like, Glee musical numbers.
Yeah.
It's every voice is just like crushed and like.
Look, as someone who has rewritten a lot of lyrics to songs in my day, there's nothing that drives me more out of my skin than ones that don't completely scan. And there's so many times in this where the emphasis is just on the wrong word or on the wrong syllable, and it's maddening. It's maddening.
Right. Like, because they have the joke about one of our producers was caught doing blow, but the emphasis is on doing.
Was caught doing
blow. And it's like, oh yeah, I love to do blow. Like, making music land is hard, and this is not a song that you're supposed to actually laugh at. It goes too fast. There are no breaks between
pauses,
lines. It's supposed to be a fun song where you get the little cleverness. In fact, nothing that Gilbert and Sullivan ever wrote is actually funny.
There's one break where there's like Harriet like chastises one of the chorus members for changing the lyrics, and that's the only natural pause for a laugh in the entire bit.
And this is also the thing about the laughter. Again, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, the uncanniness of how they sweeten it in post. Because, again, there's no natural place for a laugh, but they had to put a laugh in. And so they find the places to put in the laughs that have no resemblance to where anybody would actually laugh, setting aside the fact that the thing isn't funny, which is a whole other thing.
My theory is it's just when it's quiet. They just had to squeeze it in somewhere. So it's like, all right, laugh there, go.
And even that part where she turns around and says, something about the lyric, I couldn't catch what the lyric was.
Right, yeah.
Because the song goes too fast.
Yeah.
Right, okay, so here is what the lyric is.
Oh, boy.
They'll happily do the favor of an intellectual reach around. They'll happily do the favor of an intellectual reach around. And then they'll happily do the favor of $100 hookers reach around.
That's not funny.
Which Harriet then turns and says, that wasn't the same thing we said. And the chorus corrects it with, they'll happily do the favor of a verbal euphemistic reach around. Which again doesn't scale.
No, it doesn't
at all. Like the joke is incomprehensible because the scansion doesn't work.
Right.
Because your brain is like, what is a euphemistic? Like it doesn't.
Yeah,
like,
you can't grasp what they're saying, but also like I'll give it credit. It's a joke, but it's not a funny joke. I don't think anybody in the world would say that's a funny joke.
No. Aaron Sorkin was like, you know what? Noel Coward could build a career off of this, and so can I.
What is the difference between being like witty / clever and being funny? Because I think that there are numerous...
Well, this show is neither. So
funny to me is like just a joke that scientifically works. Like if it's a little surprising or it's got a turn or it's delivered well, like you can make a bad joke really funny with good delivery.
Yeah,
so that there's an alchemical process there that I don't feel qualified or anybody should feel qualified to really get down to the nitty gritty of. But like witty to me is a little full of yourself. You're like, because something could be witty as in like, oh, I wouldn't have thought of that, or they thought of that really quick. Which also comes into play too. Like I will laugh at something that isn't that funny if somebody thought of it very quickly.
Yeah,
and that could be wit for me. So wit might be like a mechanic that aids comedy. Sure, that's maybe a way I'd phrase it. If you can, put together words in a fast way or in a way that someone else wouldn't have expected, that's a tool to get you too funny.
And I mean, there's something to that, like, particularly because this ends with a musical number, and musical comedy songs are ridiculously hard to pull off. Case in point, one of the greatest musical composers of all time, Stephen Sondheim, had a really fucking hard time writing comedy songs.
Well, these people shouldn't be like writing comedy because it's not like If I mean that in the literal sense of like a song is hard to make funny because you innately understand the rhythm of a song. You understand like where the chorus is going to hit. You understand like for comedy to work, you need surprise. So like a lyric can surprise you if it comes out of left field, or if you break the format of the song for a second and when you don't expect them to, that might make you. Those are tools I could think of to try to inject a joke into a song. Put yourself in the context of a real person in the universe of Studio 60 who was a fan of Studio 60 and is watching this episode and is aware of the controversy. The last showrunner just did a network and ran off the set and got fired. They brought 2 new guys on. One of them did blow. And you're watching this and like, would it be funny to you? And the answer to me is like, well, no, because they're referencing a really obscure musical number.
Right.
And they're just lightly acknowledging things in the news as if to say, hey, we know.
And that's even if you can pick up the lyric at all from watching it on TV.
Well, simply acknowledging the existence of a thing is not the same as commenting on it, right?
Right. Well, all it does is relieve some pressure, which is like a good tool in comedy because there's a tension. You're like wondering, are they going to acknowledge this? Thank God they did. Yeah. And that's a great moment to then, like when someone is in the moment of relief, they're very willing to laugh, in my opinion. So like if you can time that with a joke, great. That's why that would work on paper, but it doesn't work in practice here because every other element is insane.
I also don't necessarily even buy that somebody who had been, let's say, a regular, again, taking your Joe average viewer, I'm not sure that the average viewer would be invested enough in the goings on of this show to care enough to laugh. Like I'm thinking about
who cares about the head writer of SNL? Even if you care a lot about it.
I disagree.
Okay, go on.
No. I think there is precedent for people to be like invested in the SNL drama.
But I think I would probably turn off the TV midway through this number,
right,
and just be like. Okay.
Yeah, this would be so disappointing. With that same thing I just said. Think of all the insanely funny things you can do coming back.
Exactly.
The week after that happens.
Right.
Do the same speech again.
Yes,
literally.
That's we can come up with 30 better things to do.
The really heavy thing to do is like you want to push that as much as possible. You want to be like, oh yeah, no, we're going to be just fine. And then like, no, the controversy comes back. You bring the actual guy back on, right? You bring Lauren on stage, right? You like, you get as close to the actual like hurt and pain of it as possible. That's where you get the joke that's not only like a good joke, but it's the thing that people are going to remember.
Yes.
They'll be like, oh, okay, this is where this is going from now on.
Can I ask a question of everyone?
Yeah, please.
And it's a question that Aaron himself asks at the end of every season. Apparently, this came to him from one of the producers of A Few Good Men would come into the room at the end of every day for a production meeting, and he would ask the question, what kind of day has it been? Which is the season 1 finale title and the series finale title.
Oh my God.
It's Studio 6C on the Sunset Strip.
Isn't that the season 1 finale of every show he's ever done?
Every single one.
Really?
Yeah.
So,
I didn't know that's the origin of that. I just thought that was like a little trademark he did.
So now that we are at the end of those first 2 episodes, I guess my question is, based on the whole series, because we watched the whole thing.
We sure did.
Bafflingly, we watched this entire series. We only had to watch 2 of them.
To my credit is saying this is a watchable show. I think that's why.
Yeah.
Yes,
that's true. It's compelling and
there's something here. You
Yeah.
want to see what they're going to do. And the best example of that, I think, was the Nevada episode, where it's like they have dug themselves into a hole. There's no reasonable way to get out of the hole.
Yes.
What are they going to do instead of a reasonable thing? And even then, I could not have predicted how that was going to go.
Wild.
So what kind of day is it? I mean, what are our overall impressions of the show and its legacy, I guess?
One thing that I'll say is I went and did some additional reading about like what people were saying about this show closer to the end of its run, because what ended up happening was the show got canceled. It actually got canceled before it was done airing all of its episodes. It was slotted in. That time slot was instead given to a show called The Black Donnellys, which is about some fucking Irish people or some shit.
Yeah. Very interesting show.
That show also didn't work out. And then what they did was they dumped the episodes after sweeps. Because they still wanted to air the rest of them because they were already in the can. So NBC...
And it cost so much money.
Might as well.
NBC brought the show back. They finished it up. And that's also why there's this really weird like shift that happens on those like back 6 episodes or whatever, where all of a sudden the show looks and feels a bit different. The plots make even less sense than before somehow.
Amanda Peet disappears entirely.
And
it becomes about Afghanistan.
It really does.
Almost primarily.
And so coming away from like watching the whole arc of it, I'm fascinated by this show because in a lot of ways, it does feel like a really good encapsulation of where we were at this moment. And when I say we, I mean the country. Like we talked about 24, and that season that we talked about was in the same year. It was 2006. It was the same year that this happened. And it's almost like the yin to 24's yang, where it was trying to take it from like a liberal perspective. It was trying to unpack all of this stuff, the way that entertainment interfaces with what we are experiencing, but it couldn't get away from the fundamental weird ass assumptions that the country was making at the time about what the world is. And so it just feels fucking uncanny from top to bottom because this was before the world was fucking shattered again. We were still processing the trauma of 9/11, but we hadn't actually figured out how to, like, we hadn't gotten to 2016 where the entire remainder of the illusion fell apart.
Yeah. And I think that there was I think there's something that Sorkin actually captures that is happening realistically, which was the uncanny feeling of like, we're still doing these wars, but we're not really talking about them anymore.
Yeah.
And it's him kind of desperately being like, no, Americans really should be talking about the fact that we're still in fucking Afghanistan. And then we're also in Iraq for some reason. But it's not on the news anymore. It's not sort of the main issue. It's kind of coming up. But like everyone kind of knew that like when Obama was going to be elected, that it wasn't really going to end. And I think that he's trying to deal with that and he doesn't know how to deal with it. And no one knew how to deal with that.
Yeah.
No one knew how to address that properly. And he does it in maybe the best way possible by making a show that is just as uncanny and bizarre as the reality.
And Islamophobic.
Reasons.
We have to mention.
Extremely.
This show, like, it's funny to call it liberal liberal because at the time I'm sure that's how everyone viewed it, but it is not.
Liberal in the Bill Maher sense, right?
Yeah,
it's like because he's like, well, we have to show people how patriotic Democrats are and how we're not afraid to show Muhammad. And apparently young kids don't know who Muhammad is.
And Nate Cordry played Muhammad in the sketch in the show. He played Terry Schiavo, which is an entirely different thing.
Those little like hints of the era.
Yeah, I also like to imagine that his brother, who is in Afghanistan, has been captured by the Taliban, is Rob Corddry.
I was going to say it would have been so funny if they just do a little screenshot and it's Rob. I would have fucking died. I think this show is special because it's a confluence of a lot of misguided ideas and a lot of talent. I'm not a fan of Aaron Sorkin generally. Like this and The Social Network are the only two things I would say I've enjoyed watching of his. It was a bunch of missteps, a bunch of hype, and a bunch of effort. And it's also like Aaron Sorkin at one of the heights of his career. So it's like there's a lot going on here that can't happen again. He's a movie guy now. You know, he's like way past this.
He's writing and directing all his own movies. Yeah,
you're not gonna get 22 hours of Aaron Sorkin working through some shit with a huge budget and full confidence and every bad idea in the book. You're not gonna get that again.
Alec, is there anything you'd like to plug before we?
Yeah, the first easy plug is if you wanted to read my comic Mr. Boop, we have a hardcover available now through Silver Sprocket. It's just called Mr. Boop. It's about me being married to Betty Boop. Which is real. Life. It's real. It happened. It's true. No lies in the book. And I also have a new comic that I'm working on called Crime Hot, and the third one I'm about to release. I don't know. Follow me on Twitter at Alec Robbins. It's basically porn. That's my warning. I am drawing porn at this point.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's like what if Cowboy Bebop's characters had more sex,
right?
And acted like Looney Tunes. But the big plug, if I may, let me find the exact date that this is happening. So, shoot, what is it? Is it? You can edit this part out. This is the only part I'll allow you to edit.
No, I won't. I won't touch
it. Okay, so November 19th. Okay. I am putting on a show with my friend Grace, which is a live reenactment of Studio 60 at the Elysian Theater. Thing? No. I think the plan is to do the pilot, but on rewatch, I might try to convince Grace that we should do the second episode instead. For a lot of reasons, but we can't go wrong with either one. It was pitched as reenacting the pilot, and we'll probably just cast a bunch of LA comedians to play the bits. And there's probably going to be a little more like of a twist to it, but the core that I'm thinking is it's funny enough if we just recreate the script.
I did something similar at a theater that we will never name on this podcast.
That's right, AJ.
I did the pilot of The West Wing in 10 minutes.
Amazing. Oh my God.
I played Bradley Whitford, which is why I can do a Bradley Whitford impression.
I'm going to be Matthew Perry.
Oh, great.
Good.
Yeah,
that's
incredible.
Good.
Yes, absolutely.
I will not settle for anything less.
And the date for that again is
November 19th at the Elysian Theater. We haven't even announced it yet. This is a great way to announce it.
This is a worst of all possible worlds exclusive, folks.
That's right.
It's incredibly fast, and we really haven't done much prep for it. But
we got a scoop, say. That's amazing.
I'm excited.
If you're in LA, definitely go to see that. I mean, that sounds like the greatest thing I've ever seen. Yeah. So there's an element of Studio 60 that we actually haven't talked about, believe it or not, at this point, and that is the magical clock.
Oh, yeah, the clock.
That rests on the wall of Matt Alby's office, along with a giant photo of Woody Allen, which we will not touch on this podcast, but oh boy.
It's a haunting specter throughout the whole series.
He's just kind of peeking into a lot of shots. It's horrifying.
So many scenes in that office, and it's just hanging in the background.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And basically, every time the 7 days counts down and the show goes up, it resets, and it starts ticking down for when his next deadline is due for the next week to put on the next show. And the series ends after all the happy endings because, Aaron ties up everything with a nice little bow with Matt Alby going back to work. Like every great Aaron Sorkin protagonist, he goes right back, dives back into work. And he goes and he turns on the clock and it starts ticking down. And he looks into it and he says, "I'll make a friend out of you yet."
Beautiful.
And then a theme song starts playing. And and Nat Albee jumps into a fountain and we begin Friends.
Oh God, I wish. I wish.
We didn't acknowledge that Bradley Whitford does a Chandler impression in episode 2.
It's wild. It's wild.
It's a very knowing nod, I think.
Yeah, but watching Aaron work through all of his problems in Studio 60 and returning to the newsroom, which is an entirely other bag of tricks. I do hope that while he was working on the newsroom, he somehow made a friend of that stupid fucking clock. I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes. See you next time.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
All right, folks, that's it for this one. As always, we are brought to you not by any kind of ad money or wet meats, but our patrons over at Patreon. We are listener funded, and if you join today, you can listen to all of our premium episodes going all the way back to the beginning. If you subscribe as a $10 patron, you can also get access to our additional monthly podcast just for $10 patrons. Again, a very special thanks to Alec for joining us on this one. Check out his shit. We have some links to it in the description. And our music is by Brendan Dalton. We'll see you next time.